Today is May 22nd, 2024. We are at the Nashville Bar Association located at 150 4th Avenue North, Suite 1350. My name is Carol McCoy, and I have the pleasure of conducting the oral interview of Bill Young for the Legal History Project of the Nashville Bar Association. Welcome.
Thank you, Carol.
And as we begin, I am going to go through a series of questions on an outline, but we may deviate from it depending on where it is in your history. But for starters, let me ask you your full name, date, and place of birth.
William Edwin Young. I can remember that when you're my age. William Edwin Young, August 31, 1956, born in Clarksville, Tennessee, about 40 miles up the road.
I would like for you to tell me a little bit about your family history, your grandparents on your mother's side, your grandparents on your father's side, and then we'll come down the family lineage.
Sure. We'll start with my mom's grandparents. He worked for a Goodrich plant in Clarksville, Tennessee. My grandmother worked for the...
What was his name? What was his name?
His name was Edwin Channel. Her name was Sewanee Channel, short for Elizabeth. And she worked for Petrie Cigar Company. My mom she was like me. She had several jobs throughout her life. She was a nurse late in her life. Was a teacher for a while. Ran prints for South Central Bell, helped out with my dad's business. On my dad's side, his mom didn't work. His dad ran a used car lot, and my dad was a surveyor engineer, working primarily in the Clarksville area, but also in Southern Kentucky. He was licensed in Tennessee. One of the first people licensed in Tennessee as a surveyor.
Well, let me ask you about your parents. Your mother's name was?
Judy Young.
And what was her birth date and where was she born?
Wow, you can make me think. August 1, 1935, and she was born in Clarksville, Tennessee as well.
You said that she did teach, and she also went to nursing school.
Went to nursing school very late over at Belmont here in Nashville. Once we were all out of the house, she felt like she needed something to do, so she got her nursing degree from Belmont. Probably was in her early 50s, and then worked as a nurse at the local hospital in Clarksville, Memorial Hospital, for 20 years after that. Didn't retire until she was in her mid-70s.
But she had gone to college, right?
Yeah, she went to Austin Peay University in Clarksville.
And that's where she got her degree in education?
Correct.
And so you grew up with a working mother.
I did, and she worked on and off. I mean, mostly when we were young, she basically helped my dad and helped him run his business. But she also was a substitute teacher. She got a real estate license for a while. Like I say, she got a printing machine and ran prints for South Central Bell. She had a potpourri of jobs through her life, including raising 4 children.
And your father's name and where was he born?
Bill William Nathaniel Young. Bill Young.
And where was he born and when?
You know, I think my dad was actually born in Kentucky, although they moved to Clarksville soon after, and his birthday was December 10, 1933.
You mentioned that he was a surveyor, and tell me a little bit about that, how that worked back in the early 60s, I guess.
Would have been early 60s going forward. I can remember when my dad took the test to be licensed. They required surveyors to be licensed, and he was very worried that he wouldn't pass the test. Unfortunately, he did. Like I say, he worked at that time. Fort Campbell, because the Vietnam War was growing, and there was a lot of transition, as there is today in Clarksville. So there was a lot of opportunity for a surveyor, a lot of land being sold and bought, a lot of transition going on. So he would do closing surveys, a lot of closing surveys for the banks. And once we were able to walk, his 3 sons, we were all helping him do those surveys. He would take us to the Shawnees. That was our That's how we got paid. We got to go to Shoney's for lunch.
Tell me about your brothers and your sister.
Okay, I'm the oldest. My brother that's next to me, 2 years younger, is took over my dad's surveying business, although he's greatly expanded it. He's a surveyor and an engineer. I think David is now licensed in 34 states in the United States. His business takes him all over the country. I mean, I can talk to him one day, he'll be in the Dakotas, and he'll be in Florida, and then he'll be in Illinois, Missouri, or up in New Hampshire somewhere. I mean, he really does do, I don't know how he's been able to expand the business, but he and his partner have done that, and they stay extremely busy.
And so he was born in 58, 2 years after you.
He would have been born in, right, in 1958, December 58.
And then the third child?
Is Mark, my brother Mark, is actually Joseph Mark Young, but he goes by his middle name. He was born in 1960. He's a land appraiser, is what he does in Clarksville, but he also has been in business with several of his childhood friends, buying and selling real estate. And they have done very well up there in the real estate market. And again, because Clarksville is in such a transition all the time, and it's a growing place, just like Nashville. And part of that's being close to Nashville, part of it's Fort Campbell.
And the fourth child?
Is Julie Hubbs, Julie Young. She married Don Hubbs in Camden. They live in Camden, Tennessee, over Benton County.
Okay.
And she was born in 1962. She also has her engineering license, although she hasn't used it very much. She basically stayed home and raised kids, helped out her Don in his business.
Did your mother or father, or both of them, have any strong political or community activities?
No, not really. Both my dad always said, when I would ask him about putting political signs in the yard, he said, "Son, I'm a surveyor. I don't put signs in my yard because I do business with everyone, and I don't want to make anyone angry." So neither one of them were heavily involved in politics.
I think that was Michael Jordan's philosophy.
Right, right. Well,
Did they have any community activities? I think.
I mean, my dad was raised Catholic, so he was very involved in the Catholic Church. And my mom converted from Methodist to Catholic. And,
so were you all raised Catholic?
yes, we were.
Okay. And then tell me a little bit about your childhood. The community that you grew up in was Clarksville. And as you said, it's a really booming place now. What was it like back in the 50s, mid-50s when you were born?
Mid-50s, 60s is probably when I remember most of Clarksville. It was obviously much smaller, more rural. We only had 3 high schools, now 6 or 7 there because of the growth. But much more of a community. I mean, very different from today. I mean, basically, when I was growing up, I lived in Clarksville. We might take a trip here and there, but we were pretty much in that locality and knew people there, and where we grew up and worked there.
Who do you recall as some of your favorite childhood friends?
There's a guy I know named Eddie Powers. Eddie is, we've been together since before the 1st grade, and we still keep in touch. We go to what's called the Memphis
Nostalgia Festival in Memphis.
In Memphis, we do that every year.
What is the Nostalgia Festival?
Well, it started out as a old Western actors like folks from Gunsmoke. I think Buck Taylor, who's still in his 80 now, he comes to that show. But we grew up, playing, watching Western movies, Western TV shows with Gunsmoke and others, Rawhide and that. And so we would play at Cowboys when we were kids. And so we have that in common, but really it's a time for us to get together and keep up. He became a professor of speech, theater, and worked. He just retired from a small community college outside Pittsburgh.
Okay. I think you also mentioned John Lyle.
Yeah, John and I got to know each other in high school. He went to Barksdale High, elementary, and I went to Smith Elementary. But I knew John in high school with several other friends that grew up, but John and I have kept in touch mainly because John ultimately worked with me over commerce and insurance. So one of my many jobs.
But he was not a lawyer.
No, he's not. He's an accountant by trade. And interestingly enough, when John was in college, he got his degree in agriculture.
That is interesting. I
And
didn't know that.
then ended up switching over to get a CPA, got involved in accounting and financial
And
matters.
does he live in Nashville?
He does.
So you may see him every now and then.
Oh, well, we have lunch quite often with a couple of other friends. A guy named Steve St. John and Jeff Corvin. We have lunch every few months or so just to catch up.
And tell me a little bit about Jeff Corbin.
Jeff and I were good friends back in, probably got to know Jeff in the 5th grade when he transferred into Smith School. And he became a real estate person or an insurance broker, actually an insurance broker. And he actually lives here in Nashville as well.
So he's part of that group that gets together. Now, you
Right.
told me an interesting thing about what you did together with your friends, and they had to do with comic books.
That was really Jeff Corbin. Jeff and I would sit outside my aunt Mildred's house on the stoop when we were kids, and we would trade comic books. We were into Superman, Green Lantern, adventure comic books. And unfortunately, my mom burned all the comic books, and a lot of people have that tale of mom throwing them out. They probably no telling what they would be worth now.
Eliminating your childhood memories. Do you recall any travels when you were, say, elementary school, maybe high school, family travels?
Not much. My dad was kind of a workaholic, and his idea of travel was get in the station wagon, go there, and then a day later turn around and go back. So, like I say, we grew up in Clarksville. That's where we lived. If we travel, we was to Gatlinburg or Florida, maybe for a couple of days here and there.
And besides the comic books, what other hobbies did you have?
I was into sports, particularly following baseball, collecting baseball cards even back then, but following the Atlanta Braves. I mean, Hank Aaron was my hero growing up. I can remember, I mean, we didn't have cable TV or anything back then. None of us did. And I would listen to those games on radio, but I really admired Hank Aaron, Phil Negro, was a big Braves fan, even when they weren't winning.
Now, this is jumping just a little bit, but you indicated that throughout your childhood, reading was one of your favorite activities.
I did like to read, but particularly political, historical books, biographies in particular, and even comic books.
And even comic books, the little Sherlock Holmes too.
Sherlock Holmes, yes, I read Sherlock Holmes, and then eventually later on in life got into Agatha Christie, like their mysteries. But Sherlock Holmes when I was a kid, I loved Sherlock Holmes.
Where did you go to elementary school?
Norman Smith Elementary in Clarksville.
And what activities did you have there?
Oh, now you're testing my memory.
Something about a safety patrol boy.
I was a safety patrol boy in the 6th grade. Unfortunately, my career as a safety patrol boy got cut short when a friend of mine, we were going to scare my little brother, and I was traipsing up a hill and fell, and a jacket caught fire.
Yeah.
So I was in a cast for about 6 weeks, and unfortunately couldn't continue to be a safety patrol boy. But the good news was the World Series was on at that time, and I was at home, and I got to see Bob Gibson strike out, I think, 18 batters in the World Series game, #1.
Where did you go to junior high?
Greenwood.
And then high school was? And that was the 10th through the 12th grade?
10th through 12th.
Because at that point,
correct.
Junior high was 7th through 9th.
7th through 9th.
I know they keep switching.
They changed it. I mean, back then, elementary was 1 through 6, 7th through 9 for junior high school, and then 10 through 12 of course.
Tell me about the little part-time work you did for your dad during the time that you, I think, could stand up. You and your brothers. Tell me about that.
We basically would help my dad with surveys, and he didn't have the equipment my brother has now. So a lot of that, particularly when we would divide up acreage on a farm, you were in some very rough areas. A lot of it was hacking through bushes so he could get line of sight and on his transit and take the measurements that he was required to take. the best part of those days was when you got to go to the courthouse. When he had to look up a deed and he got some cool air. Folks at the courthouse were so nice. And
Positive memories.
positive, pretty positive memory, except when we were in the brush.
Yes, that was not,
That
but I was thinking the cool courthouse.
School courthouse was positive. That was always good to go to the courthouse, and hoping Dad would stay there for a while.
So how did it change as far as your part-time work as a teen? From working for your dad, or maybe you continued to work for your dad, but you also took on another job.
Yeah, basically by the time I was 15, I needed a full-time job. I wanted a full-time job, and my dad knew the manager of a H.C. Hill store, the local H.C. Hill's grocery store.
That was Mr.
Wortham,
Wortham.
Mr. Wortham, who a nice man, great guy. And he ended up hiring me. He hired both my brothers and my sister too. So it was kind of like a family adventure for all of us. But I ended up probably working there longer than most. I worked there full-time and part-time from when I was 15 to my first year in law school, because he was always good. If I came home, he would find me a place to work there.
You started off as a bag boy.
Right. You sack groceries, checker.
Then stocking.
So I didn't do as much stocking as
Did you do
some of
inventory?
Inventory, basically putting things on the shelf. The stock guys were permanent employees, and I was always in and out. So my role was to either sack groceries or to be a checker, and more being a checker as time went on.
Did you find during your years in high school that was a full-time summer job?
Yes.
So you did that most summers while you were in high school?
Pretty much all summer,
and then
part-time after high school.
And then also the holidays when you came home
Right.
from college?
Right.
Well, tell me a little bit about college. How did you select a college to go to?
Well, I was pretty naive. I didn't have a lot of guidance. Both my parents went to Austin Peay, the local school. So the way I ended up at the University of the South of Sewanee was I had a good friend, Tommy Williams, and Tommy decided that's where he wanted to go. He wanted to go pre-med. I said, well, sounds good to me. Tommy, why don't we room together? And I really didn't think about anywhere else. So when we applied, we both got in, and we both went to Sewanee. He loved it. I hated it. nothing to do with Tommy, but Sewanee back then was a very isolated place up on Mount Eagle Mountain. And I eventually transferred to Vanderbilt after year one.
Well, I do think while you were there, what was your major?
Basically political science and history.
With an interest in debate?
Right.
And
I debated in high school, and when I talked to the folks at Sewanee, they said they were going to have a debate team and debate activities, and that never materialized. It was one of the reasons I transferred to Vanderbilt.
And then you did transfer.
I did transfer.
Sophomore year, right?
Yeah.
Same major?
Yes, political science history with minor in speech and debate.
And what debate opportunities did you have there?
Oh, Vanderbilt had excellent debate department.
You found your home.
Professor Fisher, and I wasn't a top debater. I was kind of in the mid-level, but we always had opportunities to go to debate tournaments, and I had some great partners that worked with me, particularly my sophomore year and senior year. We had a lot of fun and some success in that.
And do you recall some of your favorite professors, maybe in political science or Russian history?
Right. Professor Miller in Russian history. I did projects for him. Professor Freeman, interestingly enough, two of my good friends now I met at Vanderbilt, Waverly Crenshaw and Andy Bennett.
Both of whom?
Both of them are now judges.
On the
Andy on the Court of Appeals and Waverly on the District Court, federal bench. Right. And we were all in Professor Freeman's class and Professor Burpee's class. I think we were all in that class too.
That was the political science class.
Correct.
Burpee.
Burpee.
Did you have any memories of your debate experience during that time?
Yes.
And what would you say was the focus of that?
The memories, was a lady named Yolanda Hardaway, who was my debate partner when I was a sophomore. Here you had I have an accent, you can tell. Southern white guy. She's an African American, well spoken lady from Memphis. And so we made an interesting debate team, particularly back in those days. I think it helped us. We played off each other really well. We liked each other and had a lot of fun with it. The last I heard, I talked to Yolanda probably 6 years ago. She's down in Memphis still. And she became a lawyer as well.
Sounds like a training ground for lawyers.
It does. Several of them, Steve Cratch, who's in.
Now, did she stay your partner for the entire?
No, she got tired of debate after sophomore year.
But she was a good partner.
She's a very good partner, but she was dating some guy who was pre-med, and so she got interested in doing other things. And I had a variety of partners junior year, and then senior year I had a guy named Chris Wilson, who was in ROTC. And we probably had as much success as I've ever had at debate that fall. I graduated early in the winter of '77. But Chris and I did pretty well at some of the minor tournaments.
What other activities did you have in college that you enjoyed? Started playing tennis?
I think I started playing tennis in college. It was either college or law school. I played softball and basketball, a lot of basketball. But I also while I was in college, I was going back home, working at Hills, HB Hill. So, I was kind of in and out of Nashville. And when you transfer into a place, you develop some friends, but not as many friends as you would before you came there initially.
So you graduated early. How did that happen?
Basically, I was thinking I was going to save my folks some money. I went to summer school after my junior year, got enough credits to be able to graduate in December. And it did save my parents some money, and I was able to work with my dad between then and going to law school.
I have a note here about a medal that you won.
A Founder's Medal of Oratory. And I still say, I think I was the only one that stuck it out in my class. But I got the Founder's Medal of Oratory. I didn't find out about it until 2 years later because I didn't go to graduation. And then I ran into Professor Kowalczak, who was still at Vanderbilt. And he said, I've got something for you. I've been holding it for 2 years.
Now, you graduated from high school in '74.
Correct.
And the Vietnam War was winding down.
Correct.
And then you graduated, I think, 3 years, December '77 from college.
Right.
So you didn't do ROTC or any military service at that time. Did you ever have any inclination to do military service?
No.
Okay.
Even growing up with Fort Campbell, I mean, and then my brothers and I, we had a decent growing up, and we all needed to make money, so we were always working. All of us were working, trying to make ends meet.
I just mentioned the Vietnam War, but what other major social or economic and political events were happening probably in the early '70s and through the '70s as you were coming into adulthood? And
I mean, the biggest one obviously was Watergate, the Nixon impeachment. That was going on when we were junior, senior in high school. A lot of attention. There was a governor's race going on at that time, and I actually got involved in Hudley Crockett's campaign for governor. A lot of people remember Tom Wiseman ran in that race, who eventually became a federal district judge, as did Jake Butcher and Ray Blanton, who ultimately won.
What caused you to back or get involved with Hudley Crockett?
That's an interesting question. I just liked Hudley Crockett.
Did you know
him? The name.
It is an interesting name.
I met him once when he came to Clarksville, and he touched down, but I can remember getting his materials through the campaign and going around Clarksville, putting up his signs and stickers all over the place. Unfortunately, I think he ran fourth in that race. Unfortunately for him.
Well, Tommy Wiseman said He was the first non-felon in that race. He came in third because the first two, Jake Butcher and Ray Blanton, both ended up being convicted.
That's correct. That is
Um,
correct. And a
but-
lot of the lawyers in Clarksville are Tom, because he was a well-known lawyer in Nashville. My dad knew Tom Wiseman really well. I ended up with Hudson Crockett. Liked him.
I think that is why many candidates get support, is people like them.
And I also worked in Robin Beard's campaign when he ran for Congress somewhere.
And had you met Robin Beard?
Yes, I met him a few times when he was running for office, or when he was congressman.
I think with regards to the social, economic, and political events, during the 70s, the women's movement started. And what was your recollection about that?
Well, I guess it started, I mean, my mom was a strong influence in my family. And I remember when I was going to school, the smartest kids were the females, the girls. So, and then my sister was fairly strong. And I never understood, for me, it was always equal. I mean, in fact, they were the smartest kids in school. I can still remember the 3 smartest kids in our class were all female. And they all did very well as they left.
One of the things that you mentioned when you were in high school was that Governor Dunn was running in 1970.
Correct.
And that you, I think, helped him somewhat.
A little bit. That was, I was very young, but yeah, I was for Bill Dunn over John J. Hooker at the time. Even though I guess I would call myself a Democrat at that time. My folks were probably more Democrat than Republican. Certainly my grandfather on my mother's side was. He would never vote for a Republican. He told me the reasons that they caused the Republicans caused the Depression, so never voted. He was also a big union guy at Goodrich. They struck when I was a kid. I can still remember him sitting on the picket lines to get better wages. And for him, the Democrats supported the unions.
Do you think your grandparents had a big influence on you growing up?
More so my mother's parents than my dad's parents. My grandmother died in 1964.
Your paternal grandmother or
My
your
mother's
maternal grandmother?
But they lived right next door to us. My dad and mom actually purchased property next door and built a house over there. So I would walk across. I remember spending Friday nights with my grandmother, even though, she had passed away when I was 8 or 9 years old. But we would sit up and watch TV on Friday nights. She would let me watch the Flintstones, and then she would watch 77 Sunset Strip. And she'd let me watch it with good popcorn. And those were great.
Those are good memories. In addition to working for Robin Beard, did you meet later to be elected governor, Ned Ray McWhorter?
Yes, I'm a Governor McWhorter. That goes into my law school career. I guess kind of like my job history, my college history. I ended up going to Emory Law School for my freshman year, transferring back to Vanderbilt.
Well, let's talk about law school. What got you interested in going to law school? You had a political science, you had a debate interest, political science, history. That doesn't rule out law school, but what really drew you in?
Well, I think most people who do political science and history as a major end up going to law school, or at least they did back then. Again, I guess, Carol, I was naive and didn't have I just always set my sights on going to law school and being a lawyer. Maybe it was the influence of Perry Mason back in the day, seeing Perry Mason on TV, or knowing lawyers who worked with my dad and seeing them when I grew up. But I just always was set on going to law school. I never had any doubt that's what I wanted to do.
And you didn't have any interest in your dad's work as a surveyor?
No, my brother and I talked about that. And there were lots of reasons that I didn't want to do that.
So what led you to apply to Emory?
I applied at several, I think, University of Tennessee, Vanderbilt, Emory, and maybe a couple of other law schools. And Emory and UT. I got accepted fairly quickly. Vanderbilt on the wait list, and so I just ended up picking Emory over UT.
And what was your impression of Emory?
It was different than I thought it would be. I made several good friends in Emory, 3 very good friends. They all ended up transferring out of Emory, and I did too.
Was there something that caused you to transfer?
I think it was really, like I say, when I was a kid, I grew up in the Clarksville area, Tennessee boy. And so I was down in Georgia. I wanted to go home and practice law. Probably should have thought of that. Probably would have ended up at UT Law School. But anyway, after a year in Atlanta, and having 3 of my best friends all transfer, one went to UT, one went to University of Texas, and then Mark Moore and Mark is still practicing attorney down in Rutherford County. We both decided we were going to transfer. We looked at UT and Vanderbilt accepted both of us right off the bat. So we ended up going back here. And his home was in Nashville, so for him it was an easy choice.
Did you have any trouble transferring in?
Yeah.
They said, fine, just come on.
Just said, come on. We went up there and interviewed with the dean and talked to several people. And within a couple of weeks, they said, if you guys want to come, you're welcome.
Well, tell me a little bit about your law school experience.
It was Emory was different. It was hard as a for everyone. First year was hard. Vanderbilt was not quite as hard. It was second and third, and made a lot of good friends at Vanderbilt. My law school roommate, Dave Cupper, and Dave practices up in New Jersey still, and he and I still get together. You were talking about Governor McCoy. Mike McCoy transferred into Vanderbilt at the same time I did. We became pretty good friends. Mark Michioli, Tony McFarland, Dewey Branstero, a lot of people who practice here in Nashville now were in that Vanderbilt class, including Carl Dean, who later became mayor.
I think you had mentioned Brad McLean and Bill Leader.
Yeah, Brad and Bill were both in that class too. And that was a
and once again,
class.
Waverly
Crenshaw was in that class.
So,
Andy was a year behind us, Andy Bennett.
Okay. So people that you knew through college, you actually ended up.
Tom Farland, who eventually became a district judge up in Knoxville, was in that class. It was
pretty
Andre Blumstein was in that class. So former Solicitor General.
And you said that Tony McFarland actually very diligent, but he managed to get you to go fishing.
No, we got Tony to go fishing, which is quite a deal. Mark Moore and I were willing to skip a class every once in a while in order to go fishing. And we liked to fish back in those days, and I would take them up to somewhere near Clarksville, a place called Dice's Creek, and we would fish off a bridge. And Tony was very diligent. He never skipped a class, but we got him to skip once or twice to go with us. And
you had Andre Blumstein in your class too?
Correct. Yes.
She just retired as the Solicitor General, but I think he's gone back
to Bill Harvinson's farm.
That's right.
Where Dewey Branstero, as in Dewey's an old classmate too.
What activities did you participate in law school?
I did a moot court, which was kind of a debate, the moot court competition, and did the juvenile. Went over and worked with one of the juvenile defenders, public defenders in Metro. Also clerked at the state attorney general's office during the year.
And what did you basically do when you were clerking in the AG's office?
Basically worked on criminal briefs almost exclusively.
Did you find that to be a good experience?
It was. I mean, I met a lot of young attorneys in there, some of whom are still my friends. Larry Lewis, Jim Delanus was there. They were some great folks at the Patsy Cottrell. They were great people at the Attorney General's office, and they were all young back then. Most of those attorneys were in their late 20s, early 30s. Bill Leach was the Attorney General. Bill Hubbard, who is a good friend. Bill was the Deputy Attorney General back then. it was a great time, great experience.
What professors or courses do you recall you liked or found extremely interesting
In law school,
in law school?
oh, oh, didn't say that. Andy Shukoff taught a class on criminal law. That was interesting, and mainly because Andy was a practicing attorney at that time. So it was kind of a real life experience.
Mhm.
And I know law schools do more of that now. Probably need to do even more to get, because there's isolation from law school and what legal practice really is all about.
And I think you had indicated that classes were like evidence that you liked.
Evidence with Carl Warden was a good class. Justice Daughtry or Sissy Daughtry taught family law. And again, because of her, because she was actually practicing, that was more interesting because she had more stories to relate as
More
more
practical
experience.
insights.
Correct.
Did you work both summers? One with the AG's office, or
Yeah,
did you work both summers? Did
After
you?
my first year of law school, I worked at Hills, HD Hills
Okay.
again. And then the summers when at Vanderbilt, I worked at the AG's office.
Did you have time to work in the juvenile court as an intern?
That was just
A brief.
a brief experience, but it was an eye-opening experience.
What was it about juvenile court that opened your eyes, as you say?
Well, similar to what you'd see on the criminal side, you saw the problems that people would face that would get into trouble. I mean, some very tough issues there, particularly with juveniles, people who were young and getting in
And that
trouble.
would have been about 77, 78.
77, 76, 77.
I don't think it's changed much.
Oh, I'll take that back. That was law school. That would have been 80, 81.
Oh, okay. 80, 81.
Yeah.
What is your assessment of the value of the law school and the curriculum that they have?
I think you and I talked about this. I mean, this is my opinion. I don't think law school prepares you quite as well for the practice of law as actually doing the practice. It might be better to do 2 years of law school, 1 year of an internship somewhere where you actually learn how to be a lawyer. Remember back in the old days, before you and I were practicing law, that's how most lawyers were trained. They would go to, they didn't go to law school. They would work with an attorney for 2 or 3 years and read the law. And then they took the bar, or what the equivalent of the bar back then, and became a lawyer. Perhaps we should learn from that, because I learned more about the practice of law when I took the bar exam and also began practicing law than I ever learned.
Well, before we start talking about your career as a lawyer, I want to deviate just a little bit to bring everybody up on your family, because now you have been through high school, college, law school, and end up getting married.
Yes, that would have been after I got out of law school. I met my wife after I took the bar exam. And
how did you meet her?
Well, we have different stories. You and I talked about this. She had one of the ladies, my good friends from Emory, Julie's named Julie Fessman. And Julie was at the bar with me, and she asked me if I was dating anyone. I said no. She said, I've got the perfect person for you. And actually, her name is Jane Wright, so she is the right person for you. And so that's the first time I heard about my wife. And Julie had gone to UT Law School, so she knew Jane from there. Now, Jane's story is that our friend John Tarpley got us together for lunch. And that may have been the first time I actually met Jane. And so she gives credit to John Tarpley. I give credit to Julie Fessman. But we started dating when we were both clerks. I was clerking for Judge Paine, George Paine, on bankruptcy court. She was clerking for St. Louis Tennessee Court of Appeals.
Well, I do want to follow that up in just a second, but
I know I'm getting ahead of
you are getting ahead of me. How many children do you have?
one child.
And that is,
Beth or Elizabeth,
and she was born,
in 1991,
got married in,
1983.
okay, so you had a few years before you had a child.
Yes.
And that's
Yeah.
kind of like when you're taking the bar and just starting practice, right?
Yeah, I mean, when we had trouble having a child, we considered adoption for a while. While we were in the process of considering adoption,
It always
lo and-
happens.
lo and behold, in fact, we had just missed out on adopting a child to some really good friends of ours who were in church with us. There were three couples that were considered by the birth mother, and she ended up picking some good friends of ours, continue to be good friends from our church.
And where's Jane from, your wife?
Jane is from Nashville.
Does she have brothers and sisters in
No,
the
she's
family?
an only child.
But she is a tennis.
She's a tennis, kind of like Carol McCoy.
She
She
loves
is
to
a-
play tennis.
Loves to play tennis. She plays tennis all the time. but she's
Now, is your
retired.
daughter a lawyer? Yes,
No.
mother and father are
No,
lawyers.
Our daughter's story is that she grew up with two lawyers and saw what kind of life that was, and she became an accountant. She got her certified public accounting license.
And does she like,
She does. She works for a company called Envision here in town. She worked for one of the big three accounting firms for several years and kind of learned what it was like to be a CPA, and then like many others ended up going to a private company. She loved it.
we touched a little bit on this, but let's go back now. Your career as a lawyer. The bar exam. How did you approach it, and who did you look to kind of help get ready to take the bar exam?
Well, I think, you develop good friends in law school, and so we all, the common thesis was that you take the
Don Paine,
Don Paine,
Crossley.
thank you, Paine Crossley, of course, and that was, I have to say, it really prepared you for the bar. Those guys did a great job. Not only did they do a great job of preparing you for the bar, but it was also very entertaining. Both of them had great stories that would lead into it. They seemed to know where the bar exam was going, particularly on the written questions back then. The multi-state, we used to call it multi-guess. I would still remember thinking there were at least two correct answers to some of those multi-state questions. But everyone took that course. I took it here in Nashville. And did a lot of studying outside of the course.
Now, when you were finishing law school, you knew you had to take the bar exam. What were you doing in addition to preparing for the bar exam? Had you lined up a position somewhere?
I had accepted a position as clerk it was at that time Russell Hippie was the bankruptcy judge. And in the midst of the summer, before I was to go in and clerk with Judge Hippie, he decided to return to private practice, and George Paine was appointed as a replacement. I still remember, everyone who knows George Paine knows he has a wicked sense of humor. And I still remember Judge Hippie getting me together with Judge Paine, I think over at the Cumberland Club, and going in there. And the first thing George Paine said to me, he said, I see you went to this, what's this, the University, the Sewanee, you went there and then you left. And I mean, it must have been a horrible place. And of course, he went 4 years to the University of the South, and he was just egging me on to say something bad about it. It was just his wicked sense of humor. But he ended up offering me the job and saying, I'm going to stick with Russell Hippie's decision here. I heard you're going to be a great guy. And we're still fast friends, still have lunch occasionally. I give Judge Paine a lot of credit for making me the lawyer that I am. He was a great mentor.
Tell me about the beginning salary when you started working for George.
$32,000. And actually that was really good. My wife was not making near as much.
I was going to say, how did that compare with other lawyers that you knew their first year and with other professions to the extent that you knew?
Well, actually, it wasn't bad. I mean, even lawyers in private practice, going out in private practice back then weren't making money that you hear now, $200,000-300,000 for first year lawyers. Even in Nashville, at best, they were paying 40 or 50,000, maybe. Jane was making 23 as a state court judge, law clerk. You know,
Did she clerk?
she clerked for Judge Sam Lewis.
Sam Lewis, okay, so
So-
wasn't making as much as you, but you were
No.
clerking for a federal
Federal
benefits.
judge. A federal judges, their clerks tend to get paid a little better.
Tell me a little bit about your daily routine and how you and Judge Paine approach things.
It was basically the way Judge Paine wanted to report. So the first thing he did, I would handwrite out memos to him, and he said, "We're not doing that anymore." I mean, this is before computers, obviously. And he said, "You need to learn how to use a dictaphone." Back then, that was what lawyers used. Dictate out memos and secretary would type them up.
As a law student, you didn't have a dictaphone.
No, you didn't. And I'd actually taken a typing course, and before I went to law school, I wish I could type even better than I do, but at least learn the fundamentals. Unlike my wife, who's a wonderful typer, who can type 80 words a minute. But he got me to use the dictaphone, and his secretary Carol helped me with that. He also changed my name. I grew up, I was Billy. I was always Billy. If you run into anyone who knows me from Clarksville, they're going to call me Billy. He insisted on calling me Bill. He said, "From now on, you're going to be Bill. No one's going to call you Billy up here." And basically, I would prepare memos for him, and got to the point where I would write opinions for him. And there was one funny incident. It was near the end. I wrote a draft. I really, it was a close question. So, I wrote a draft. I didn't even bother to correct any errors in it, just to get his opinion on where we ended up. He signed the darn thing, sent it out. So we had to recall it. I asked him, I said, "Judge Paine, what were you thinking?" He said, "Well, you always do excellent work. I just thought it was going to be fine."
That's
But-
high praise.
But yeah, it was high praise, but he was a great guy, and I learned so much from him. I really learned how to respect attorneys. He always treated attorneys that appeared in front of him with respect. He didn't take his job too seriously or himself too seriously, and I attribute some of that to his service in Vietnam. He realized what was important and what wasn't.
I think there was one other bankruptcy judge at the time.
There was, when I started, it was Judge Jennings, and then ultimately Judge London, Keith London took Judge Jennings' place.
Okay. What were some of the first or early cases that you had in bankruptcy court? First things that you remembered? I think you mentioned like a George Jones, who was in
Other country music, he filed bankruptcy, so that bankruptcy was in Judge Paine's chambers, and it was just interesting to see George Jones appear in
he
bankruptcy.
had been engaged or married to Tammy Wynette, maybe.
Right, back at the time, and you would see some of that, and back then, and it's still the same in bankruptcy court. There was the same lawyers who did bankruptcy. Some of the ones who were there when I was clerk still do it. I mean, Bob Walschmidt, Kenny Cosner, John McLemore was a trustee.
Ray Busey.
Ray Busey. I mean, you can go on and on. Bill O'Brien. They're still doing it.
Edgar Rothschild.
Edgar
Is
Rothschild.
Gail Reese still involved?
I don't think so, but Gail was involved for a long time.
So did you clerk for 1 or 2 years?
2 years, actually 2.5 years. Judge Paine kept me on for another half year while I was going through the process of getting married. So he gave me an extra 6 months.
On the daily routine, what were your working hours, lunch, office location?
Yeah, basically 8 to 5. Judge Paine, I would go into court, listen to the arguments, take notes, and basically I would prepare memos or even draft opinions for him to consider. We got into a pretty good routine between him and Carol, his secretary, and me. We would get them all done.
Did y'all go to lunch together or did you go out?
Yeah, occasionally we would go to lunch together. More often I was finding, friends in town would go to lunch
And
together.
at that time, the federal courthouse was over on 8th and Broad. Where
Right.
was the bankruptcy court?
We had just moved into the custom house. In fact, we made that move. Beth Derrick, who was Judge Jennings' clerk and ultimately Judge London's clerk, Beth and I started out over in the federal courthouse, but within 6 weeks we moved into the customs house, which is where they still are.
They still are there.
Yeah.
And this is 2024, so they've been
Right.
there quite a while,
Right.
even though the federal courthouse has actually moved.
It's actually moved.
When we were talking about interesting cases, not only George Jones, but I think you said the Marathon Pipeline.
Marathon Pipeline. We spent a lot of time on that. Well, that was when the Congress had made the bankruptcy judges Article 3 judges as part of one of the bankruptcy reform acts, and that was struck down by ultimately by the Supreme Court, saying they couldn't make them Article 3 judges; they had to be Article 1. But as that case was winding its way up to the Supreme Court, Judge Paine and Judge London were very involved in that and got their clerks involved in it. And it was very interesting to watch because for them, they had a full docket and they wanted the respect for that. And that respect was being an Article 3 judge. I think that the salaries ended up about the same, even though they ultimately lost Article 3 argument.
When you're involved in all of these things and he has you stay on for an extra 6 months
Right.
to get through the wedding, what did you do as you began to look for other opportunities? What did you do when you were getting ready to leave bankruptcy?
I looked around and ultimately there were 2 opportunities that materialized. One was with the Baker Worthington firm at the time, that's Baker Donaldson. And that would have kept me in Nashville. But the opportunity that I ended up taking was with a Memphis firm called Laughlin, Halley, Clark, Gibson, and McBride. And they were looking for a lawyer to basically go to their Washington, D.C. office. And I met with Ross Clark and John Ryder. John wasn't much older than me, but John and I, and Ross Clark and I, we had a connection. I really liked those guys, particularly Ryder. We had a lot in common. We were both bankruptcy lawyers. We loved baseball and we loved politics. John was very active in the Republican Party. And so I ended up accepting that job, and Jane and I moved to DC.
And Jane gave up her job?
Jane did. She was working for the State Board of Equalization at the time as an administrative law judge, essentially.
And what happened when you moved to DC?
Good and bad. The job that I took in DC, which was supposed to be helping
Jim
Jim
McBride?
McBride, who was a tax attorney, and he had worked for one of the big railroads, and they thought he was going to bring a lot of tax work into the office, and he had enough to keep him busy and one of his associates halfway busy, but not me. And so I ended up working on a lot of projects that were coming to me from Memphis, from John Ryder and other lawyers down in Memphis. And back then we didn't have computers. So the great thing about it, I did get to do a lot of that research at the Library of Congress. That was where you would go. They had all the books. And so I would, spend the day in the Library of Congress writing memos, preparing memos, and then shipping them back down to Memphis. We shared space with some other attorneys who I got to know. Jane ultimately ended up working with the Department of Health and Human Services as a staff attorney. But after a year, it became obvious that there just wasn't enough work. It wasn't going to be enough work, and I wasn't doing anything that I wanted to do. So we made the decision I needed to do something else. Even though I love the guys in Laughlin Halley, it just wasn't enough work there.
So what did you do?
The nice thing about that, we got to do a lot of things in DC as a young couple. That, I mean, DC is a great place to be if you're young and you don't have children responsibilities. And we, on the weekends, we would go see a lot of different things, either in DC or in Baltimore or down in Virginia. We would
A lot of history too.
and we both had the ability to do that because the jobs weren't that
Taxing.
pressing.
So as you're looking at the work that's being asked of you and you making this decision, you're going to come back. What did you do with regards to finding a position?
I had two opportunities. I mean, we first talked to the Tennessee Attorney General's office. I'd always thought the world of Bill Hubbard and those guys, and I clerked there. And their position at the time, Bill Leach was still there. I talked to Bill Hubbard, who was the chief deputy, and Bill's position was, we'd love to have one of you. We can't have both. We don't allow married couples to work together. And I said, okay. So Jane was looking at that. But I was looking at, I had a friend from law school, Greg Nelson, who had just accepted a position with the United States Justice Department in their tax division. And so Greg encouraged me to interview with them, and I did. I was offered a position up there. I was also offered a position with a law firm of Spate and Parker in Nashville. And Jane and I talked about it, and it was a silly decision at the time, but the Justice Department wanted a 4-year commitment. And I was about 28 years old, and 4 years seemed like a long time. And so we both wanted to get back to Nashville. So I took the position with Spate and Parker down in Nashville, even though it was less money. And Jane.
When you say less money, what was it in comparison to what you were making as a law clerk?
The rider, what I was making in DC was about the same, 38,000.
Mhm.
When I went back to Spate and Parker, it was 22,500. And I could have made 38 or 40 at the Justice Department. And Jane was making about 25,000 at the AG's office. Those salaries were very different.
What was the environment like at Spate and Parker?
You know, medium-sized law firm for Nashville back then. Richard Spate had been with the DA's office. Bob Parker, who unfortunately just passed away a month or so ago, was kind of a business lawyer, insurance defense lawyer. That's where I first met Rose Cantrell.
She worked there.
She worked there. George Dean worked there, and Kimberly, his wife, was working with Jane at the AG's office. Same time I was working with George, so we became fast friends, and became fast friends with the Cantrells. And Sheree Wright, who's now head of the Tennessee Bar Association. Sheree was there as a young lawyer. So it was mostly insurance defense, although there was some bankruptcy work that I worked with Rose on. We did.
So Sheree and George Dean and Kathy Paget.
Kathy Paget was there as well. And
Phil.
Kathy's husband at that time and I were in law school together, Phil Elbert. All these people I went to law school with, they all come back into my life at some point in time.
What interesting cases do you remember while you were there? You mentioned about a truck driver.
Yes, that was a sad case, actually, that Rose and I, we were representing one of the insurance companies. A truck driver was coming down a hill and he was going down it too fast and couldn't brake quick enough. And a woman and 3 children were in a truck crossing. They had the green light, but he couldn't stop and he ran into a killer. And so we had to, Rose and I had to go out and interview the guy, the truck driver, as part of preparing for the case. And the poor guy, he had been 27, 28 years old. And his only worry, he killed 4 people. His only worry was whether he was going to be able to keep his license, his truck driver's license. And I can remember when we walked out of there, Rose was very good. She conducted the interview. She walked out, shook her head, and said, "No, last thing he needs to be worried about is keeping his truck driver's license."
You were defending the carrier.
The carrier, and we were. I think we ultimately paid in the limits because of the liability was there. But that was interesting, and then helping Rose with a lot of bankruptcy cases that Security Federal had that were just small cases going Chapter 7, Chapter 13 hearings.
So how long were you at Richard at Spate and Parker?
Just a year, a little over a year, perhaps. You know, I was getting paid 22.5, and I saw an ad in the newspaper back when you actually looked at the newspaper. And the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation was looking for a bankruptcy attorney to basically manage in bankruptcy cases. This was the time in the late 80s where you had a lot of bank failures across the nation. And in Tennessee,
And
you had
SNLs
Butcher.
too?
S&L's later.
Oh.
But these were banks,
Thanks.
and the butcher banks had all failed. There were other banks in Tennessee that had failed. The FDIC was scrambling to create offices. They created a national office to handle the Tennessee region, including Northern Alabama, Southern Kentucky. So they were looking at a person to head up their bankruptcy area. I knew the two ladies who were working over there in the commercial side, Sally Ridenauer and Allison Lucas. And so I interviewed for the job, and they offered it to me, and you know, it was $10,000 salary increase. So kind of easy decision.
And how long were you with the FDIC?
I was there a little over a year. It was interesting how that job ended. Basically, at that time, you mentioned the SNLs. The SNLs were going under too, and so the FDIC was scrambling. And the lady I reported to in Atlanta called me one day, Barbara Lukes, and Barbara said, "Bill, they were on the golf course on Friday, and they made the decision to close the Nashville office and move everyone to Waco. Would you be interested in going to Waco, Texas?" And I said, "Well, Barbara, I might be, but I don't think my wife will be. She's got a good job, so I think I'm going to start looking around." And but I've enjoyed working with you guys.
At this time, you had a little. Anyway, so you're offered an opportunity to go to Waco, Texas, and you have a baby, and
No, we didn't have our
oh,
child.
not that, but
But no, my wife wasn't going to.
Jane had a good job. So what did you do?
So I called Bill Hubbard again at the AG's office, and I said, "Bill, I said, I'm going to start looking around again. And I'm just wondering if the policy has changed, because I knew Jane, and she really liked working for them, and I'd enjoyed clerking with them." And Bill said, "We've got a new Attorney General, Mike Cody. He's much more enlightened than Bill Leach." And we're growing, and we don't have that policy anymore, so we'd love to talk to you. And I interviewed with Larry Lewis and Kate Eiler, and Kate was running the financial division, Larry the tax division. And I had known Larry from when I clerked there. And they both offered me the opportunity to come with their respective divisions, and I ended up going with the tax division just because I know Larry, and I like Kate too. But so I ended up going to the AG's office
And working with Larry.
and working with Larry Lewis, who was my boss.
What was it about the tax division that you found interesting?
A lot of litigation. If there was a legal reason, was that the financial was less litigation. I mean, the tax division dealing with state taxes, where it was sales tax, franchise, and excise. At that time, there was a lot of litigation, primarily in the chancery courts, but they also had direct appeal to the Tennessee Supreme Court. So you're going to have the opportunity to get in front of a lot of judges, and I did. I had the opportunity to get in front of a lot of judges
Across the state.
And ultimately even out of state. I ended up, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but because I had bankruptcy experience, and the Attorney General's office had no one that knew anything about bankruptcy, all the bankruptcy cases that the state was involved in would come to me. And a lot of those involved out of state bankruptcies. So I ended up going to Delaware on bankruptcy up there, to Cincinnati when they tried to pull us into a bankruptcy, Federated Department Stores up there. We traveled to Phoenix, Arizona on those asbestos cases. So, and I got to appear in front of the bankruptcy judges throughout the state too. So it was, and some Sixth Circuit arguments resulted from the bankruptcy litigation. So a lot of court experience, very good experience, and good people to work with.
Well, that is one of the things that you mentioned, is the lack of any personnel, any lawyers with bankruptcy experience except you. And in a sense, you kind of developed that niche and hired I think Kathy Ayers, maybe.
Right.
To
After
be-
about 5 or 6 years there, we were doing more bankruptcy. By this time, Mike Cody had left and Charles Burson was the Attorney General. And Charles Burson decided he needed to he really was trying to get some of his senior attorneys more money. So he created these positions called senior counsel. At that time, it was Associate Attorney General, but it was a higher title. But in order to get the title, you had to come up with a project. Well, Larry and I talked about it. He said, well, you're already doing the bankruptcy stuff. Why don't your project become creating a bankruptcy division within the tax division, or bankruptcy unit really within the tax division? And so I said, yeah, sure, I'll draw that up. And we did draw it up, and we ended up hiring 3 attorneys ultimately that reported to me in the tax division and did a lot of helped me with bankruptcy work, including Kathy Ayers, who you mentioned. And Kathy at that time was married to Judge London, Keith London.
Over at the bankruptcy court.
With the bankruptcy court. So getting Kathy over there was
Well, she had a lot of good experience.
she did, and she was smart as a whip and a very likable person. She fit in just fine. We also hired Teresa Zahn, Teresa now is the clerk of the bankruptcy court. Teresa had been with the Department of Revenue, handling bankruptcy matters over there. So she had a lot of experience. And then Charlotte, and I'm trying to think of Charlotte's last name, who worked with the IRS. So between the 3, I mean, we had Kathy Ayers, who had national reputation on bankruptcy matters. Teresa, who knew a lot of the revenue state work. And then Charlotte, who knew the federal IRS side of it. So that was a really strong unit.
You were talking about the cases that you had, the franchise and the excise tax cases. You have this bankruptcy that you're making. You mentioned an individual named Chris Whittle.
Chris Whittle, as I developed experience at the AG's office, Larry assigned me to a lot of the big franchise excise tax cases. And at that time, Chris Whittle and I think a guy he knew had developed, he went to University of Tennessee, but they developed this project where they would sell materials to incoming students, college students, to accumulate them to the college experience. And it took off. They did this not just at UT, but across the nation. It made lots of money, and ultimately they ended up using that money to buy a number of publications and they were publishing these things all over the United States, multi-million-dollar business. And he was famous in his own right. And we had an issue when they sold that business to Times Incorporated. They didn't want to pay any franchise and excise tax on the sale, on the income related from the sale, and we thought they should. The state thought they should. So there was a lot of litigation. I think Mike Sontag, Mike was on the other side of that with Bass Berry. And one of the part of that, I had to take Chris Whittle's deposition, which is an interesting deposition because part of it you have to go through his life history. And he had an interesting life history.
Did they end up paying the tax?
No, we litigated it all the way to the Tennessee Supreme Court. The first time we argued it, Mike and I did, apparently the court split 2-2, and by that time Sissy Daughtry had left the bench, so they only had 4. And because they split 2-2, they set it for re-argument down in Jackson, Tennessee. And ultimately, the court ruled 3-1 against the state. I had Justice Reed, still think Justice Reed was right. The funny story out of that, I think I told you, was by that time, Jane had left the AG's office and was staff attorney for the Supreme Court. And she worked closely with Justice Anderson. And Justice Anderson just lit me up in the court. I mean, he really did. And he obviously strongly believed in Mike's position. And so he's leaving the courtroom. I heard this story later from my wife. He's leaving the court, the bench, and he mentions to one of the other staff attorneys. He said, "Do you think I was too hard on that assistant AG?" And she said, "Well, maybe, but you know who that is, don't you?" She said, I know it's Bill Young. Well, that's Jane Young's husband. Oh, he said, really?
But
he-
they don't
I
know.
didn't think he gave me too hard a time. I mean, I think they just didn't like the state's position.
You mentioned some crazy cases that you had while you
Yeah.
were there. What were some of those?
Yeah, I used to, when I first got there for a while, I would get all the, what I call were people who were suing for who knows why. But we had one where before Charles Burson became the Attorney General, was head of the Board of Bar Examiners. We had two ladies out of Memphis who sued the board and General Burson individually, I think, and several others individually, claiming that there was no way they should have failed the bar. They both had failed to say bar. In fact, not only there was no way they could fail the bar, they got every question right. They know they did. And they initially sued in federal court when those ran out of steam. They sued again in state courts. I lived with them for 3 or 4 years. I think one of them eventually got a Mississippi law license and they kind of disappeared. But those cases where the litigants are pro se and they feel very strongly, they just go on and on. But that was one example of many that I got where basically they were pro se and they were litigious
And they last forever.
and they last forever.
Well, how did you meet Connie Clark?
At that time, Judge Clark was in Williamson County, circuit court judge, and she had been sued in another what I call crazy case in her capacity as judge in a bankruptcy proceeding. And she was really concerned that she needed to get private counsel. And I said, Judge Clark, I mean, we can handle this. I mean, it's in front of George Paine. I clerked for him. I think we'll be okay. And then, we've got judicial immunity. You should be fine. And she was very nervous about it. And she really was wanting to hire her own private counsel initially. And so I said, no, and I think she talked to Joe Burson at the time, and he convinced her to let us keep it. And sure enough, we got it dismissed on judicial immunity grounds. They appealed it. It was a fine. But that was the first time I met Justice Clark, and we ran into each other quite a bit through the years.
Well, tell me about the couple who was very religious that wanted to discharge their student loans.
Yeah, another one, speaking about George Paine's perverse sense of humor. I had a case up in Cookville. These two a young couple with several children, and they were very devoted to their religion, or so they said. And they filed bankruptcy. They were trying to discharge their student loans. Well, student loans can only be discharged under the law if you show a quote unquote hardship. And so we argued very strongly that there was no hardship here. They were just trying to get rid of debt that they shouldn't be able to get rid of. Well, Judge Paine, being the sympathetic guy he is, he loves debtors. He would admit that, but he was taken with their story, and he granted them a hardship discharge. And so I appealed to the Sixth Circuit. I still remember their attorney who was doing this pro bono complaining to me, saying, "You're making me go to the Sixth Circuit on this case." I said, "Well, we think we're right." And unfortunately, we lost the Sixth Circuit case 2-1. We did have a good dissent, and the bottom line of the story was, though, that couple ended up going through a nasty divorce, and weren't quite as religious, perhaps, as Judge Paine thought. And I did mention that to him at some point in time, but he gave me the hardest time. He said, "Here, this young couple just walking with the Lord, young, and you're representing the state trying to destroy their life and trying to take care of these kids, raise them the right way." They were sending the kids, by the way, to private school. In addition to trying to discharge their student loans, they're still sending their kids to private schools. So anyway.
Well, as you were with the AG's office, you have a very wide and diverse number of cases. You've got the tax cases, the bankruptcy cases, the crazy cases, the ones that linger and linger. Let us go. How long were you with the AG's office?
I was there until 1996 or 95, I think.
And what happened then?
1995, January 95. basically, I mentioned John Ryder earlier. John Ryder and I had stayed in touch and were very good friends. He was one of my mentors. And we stayed in touch because of the mutual interest in bankruptcy, baseball, and politics. And Don Sundquist had been elected governor in '94. It was a Republican sweep. That was the year Bill Forrest won the Senate, and also Fred Thompson won the Senate. Had two Senate seats up at once. Unusual, but it happened. So the Republicans swept everything. And I was interested in working with Governor Sundquist administration. So I mentioned it to John. I said, John, if there were an opportunity there, a good opportunity, I'd be interested. And the next thing I know, I get a call from Hardy Mays, who's an attorney down in Memphis, who was the governor's general counsel, been appointed to governor's general counsel. And Hardy said, Bill, so I talked to John. I'm kind of imitating Hardy. Hardy had a great accent from Memphis. He said, I've got two opportunities for you. They're both with this new guy we got as Commissioner of Finance Administration by the name of Bob Corker. And I knew Bob Corker because I had given Bob Corker some money when he ran against Frisk in the primary. He's from Chattanooga. And so I went over and met with Bob Corker, and he said, I've got two positions I think you'd do good at. One's my general counsel, but I really think this other one's more interesting. And we want to create a division in commerce and insurance that will do oversight of this new TennCare program that Governor Porter had created before he left office. We need someone to work with the comptroller's office. And Bill, there's no one over there doing this now. You're gonna have to hire your whole staff. We've got the money to set it up if you want to do it. And I really think that's more interesting than being my general counsel. So he pretty much told me where he wanted me to go. And I ended up taking the job. We met with Commissioner Sizemore, who's the Commissioner of Commerce and Insurance, who I would report to, but I really reported to Bob Corker. And Sizemore was a great guy. He was all in on it. And so I ended up moving over and doing that.
And you became the Deputy
Commissioner of Commerce and Insurance in charge for TennCare oversight.
And how was it that you ended up reporting to Bob Corker?
Because TennCare at that time fell under the purview of the Commissioner of Finance Administration. So everyone dealing with TennCare, and because it was such a hot topic, there were these managed care organizations that were now administering the program. A lot of them were having financial problems. So there was a lot of concern that there were reasons behind the financial problems that were that the state needed to take action on those. It was a big public relations issue. And so they wanted Bob Corker to be in charge of it. And that was exciting 4 years that I did that with Governor Sundquist's office. And it was a total shift. I mean, we do this for attorneys. Just by happenstance, a total shift in what I did. I mean, I had been a tax bankruptcy lawyer, done a lot of litigation, and now I shifted to healthcare and overseeing a team of people who are basically doing audits of these organizations. Oh, shit.
What was the main focus of your efforts? You talked a little bit about these new TennCare companies that have been set up. For those who are not that well versed in TennCare and its origins, that was the Tennessee version of
Medicaid program. At that time, it used to be, and this is true for every state, Medicaid was administered by the state with federal oversight. And so the way the states generally would do it is they would hire providers, hospitals, doctors to provide care to Medicaid recipients, and then they would process and make claims, the state would. TennCare changed that. Other states, most states have moved in this direction now. Instead of the state processing claims, the state would hire companies on a capitated basis, basically pay so much per Medicaid recipient. And then that company would be responsible for getting the
processing claims and paying
processing claims, getting the provider network, so forth and so on. And so,
And did those providers negotiate the contracts?
that providers will negotiate the contracts with the managed care organizations or the MCOs.
Okay,
And so instead of just everybody doing it, you get paid whatever through Medicaid. So it was a very, I mean, Tennessee was on the cutting edge of that. And unfortunately, the managed care organizations, a lot of them were financially unstable.
one was an experience. They
Oh.
didn't know really.
Yeah, I'd say more than one.
Oh, no, I didn't mean, I did not mean one. I actually think Xantus, I think, was the first one put into receivership
Yes,
because I was sitting as chancellor at that time and
You were.
came to me.
I remember appearing in your court. And,
And then you got to sit in my seat.
I think I got to sit inside there, and I actually, and we're jumping ahead, but I can remember I got subpoenaed to appear in front of a grand jury on federal court to testify about possible criminal violations by Xantus.
I think there were 5 companies initially set up.
Yeah, there was Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee, which was the kind of the anchor, the solid company. Access Med Plus, run by a guy named Tony Seagram, African American controlled company that was also financially unstable. That being a polite way of putting it. Sam Howard, who ran Xantus, Sam was also African American, but his was a very different company than Tony's, because Sam had on his board Governor Porter, Clayton McCorder. I mean, he had some top-notch healthcare people on his board, and he'd gotten funding from them, I think, to set this up. Sam had a good reputation across the state in healthcare, so he set up.
And he'd come from HCA.
He'd come from HCA, that's right. And
And
then
he
you
also had a degree in finance, didn't he? I think.
Right, I think that's correct. Then you had a couple out of Memphis, Omnicare, also an African American owned company, and then a company called TLC, which stood for Tended Loving Care. That our current treasurer, David Lillard, was their counsel. They were owned by, I think, some hospitals or providers down there. And then the other one was Baptist Hospital here in Nashville, had one for a while. And John Deere had one. I forget what John Deere. John Deere had one of the managed care organizations.
As you're going through all of this, what did you experience in dealing with these companies? You said they were financially not well managed, most of them. I think Blue Cross Blue Shield, you said that was.
Yeah, Blue Cross, because of the revenue behind them, was stable.
And they knew how to process
They
claims.
knew how to process claims and a lot of experience in it. The rest of them, I mean, Deere did, John Deere, they were based up in Iowa. They were dabbling in this at the time, but they certainly seemed to know what they were doing. I think TLC, because they had a provider base behind them, knew what they were doing. The rest of them struggled, including Baptist. And so what our charge was to go in and do audits, and working with the comptroller's office and do audits and determine whether there were problems. And then it was up to the TennCare itself and FNA and ultimately the governor to take action if they found out.
I was going to ask you, how did that proceed? So if you found an audit where things were not being done properly, you reported then to Corker, who oversaw.
Right.
They're the ones that are advancing the state funds to these.
And they would either, they could term the contract, or they could force them to do things, or force them to make corrections. And so there was a lot of back and forth, and those were very tense negotiations, particularly with Access Med Plus and Xantus down the road.
Were you involved in those?
Yes. The first one was with Omnicare out of Memphis. Was the first audit. Omnicare entered a contract that basically said they were paid per member, a dollar amount per month per member. But their contract was what was called a preferred provider contract, where they only got to keep 10% of the money they received, and the rest 90% had to be spent on medical care. If it wasn't spent on medical care, then they had to return it to the state. And our audit found that during the first couple of years, their medical loss ratio was around 45 or 50%. So they owed, oh gosh, I think it was $38 million back to the state of Tennessee. And so we asked them, and of course they strongly opposed that, claimed the contract didn't require them to pay it back. But they had kept money in the bank. It didn't leave their bank account. So ultimately they repaid that money to the state of Tennessee.
Did they continue to operate?
Mm-hmm. And that's what they wanted. They wanted to continue to operate. They wanted to change their contracts. That's why they paid it back. But that was a big, I mean, they weren't going to pay it. I'm convinced they weren't going to pay it back until they were called on it.
How long did you stay in the position as deputy commissioner?
4 years,
And
basically through the first term.
then, what caused you to move on?
I received, well, I mean, those kind of jobs are pressure filled jobs.
Yes.
4 years, it's like 20 years.
So your hours weren't really 8 to 5 anymore.
No, they weren't 8 to 5, and they really weren't that at AG's office. I mean, they were damn it low, but at TenCare it was 24/7. And if you ever worked with Bob Corker, and Bob, he'd call you at 3 a.m. He'd be up in the office working. I mean, he just was workaholic. Great guy, but he was workaholic.
Was that your first exposure to him?
Yes, yeah, and we were very close during. Hey, he only stayed a year and a half. John Ferguson took over his spot after that, but most of the, well, I won't say most of the drama, but a lot of the drama occurred when Bob Corker was there. So anyway, at the end of the first term, I got a call from a company, an association called Hospital Alliance. And I'm trying to remember the guy, Harlan Matthews was who called me, which was, all right, here I am a Republican. Harlan Matthews is an Ed McWhorter Democrat, and Senator Matthews, because he was senator for a while,
Right.
And he was just so gracious. He called me up. He said, "Bill, there's an opportunity out here, and we think you're the guy. We've got the executive director of Hospital Alliance is leaving. A lady named Elliot Moore, and she's had enough, and we really need someone like you. We want you to do the job." And they would offer me more money, and it was a small organization, but it sounded like a right time to move on.
And do you recall what you were making as the deputy commissioner?
60,000.
And how did this new position compare salary-wise?
100.
So a nice step up.
Yeah, it was a nice step up, and it was some interesting negotiations with Commissioner Ferguson while that was happening, but I ended up leaving. I got burned out. You talk about John Lyle, you asked about him. He was my assistant commissioner.
Oh.
During this time. I reached out to John because I knew.
So your good friend was also.
Yeah, assistant commissioner, and he had gone through me with this, and we had hired a bunch of auditors, some of who worked out, some who didn't. We had a good crew, but John decided he was going to go back to Deloitte, so he was already leaving, and second term I was ready to go, and this was a great opportunity.
And what was the opportunity? What did you do?
Basically, Hospital Alliance represented not-for-profit hospitals. Before the General Assembly and the executive branch, they basically got relations for not-for-profit hospitals. And they also would get in disputes with the for-profits, trying to ensure that they didn't take their territory. So you represented the not-for-profit hospitals, or probably about 60 of them across the state at that time through the part of the association. And a lady named Adrian Nestrick was my number 2. There were only 3 of us that worked at this place. And we basically were lobbyists and government relations people.
And what did you find with regards to that experience?
Interesting, because the for-profit hospital, not-for-profit hospital tension had kind of died down by then. So the guy who was head of the Tennessee Hospital Association, Craig Backer, and I got along. I like Craig, and Mike Huggins was his government relations guy. So we really, at that time, the hospitals were all kind of working together. They weren't opposed, and they were trying to get more reimbursement out of the TennCare program. We also were supportive of Governor Sunquist's income tax efforts, because that we saw that as a way to help us get more money to pay for Medicaid folks. They were probably right. They were underpaid for Medicaid in comparison to private insurance and Medicare. So our job was to do those battles on the legislature and executive branch.
So as you're working with these profits, nonprofit entities, and you're going before the legislature to try and get additional funds for the reimbursement, what did you find with regards to the alliance and with regards to the Tennessee Hospital Association?
Yeah, I guess after a year and a half there, I became convinced that these really should come together.
Did that happen?
No, as I was getting ready to, probably towards the end, we discussed that with our board, and the board said, no way, we're not gonna do it. And I said, well, it's y'all's decision. But at that same time, the hospital association offered me the position of general counsel
Oh,
to the Paine Hospital Association. But it was a weird deal because the Hospital Alliance wanted me to continue to work as kind of a consultant with them. So the deal that was worked out, I became general counsel for the Tennessee Hospital Association, paid 9% of my salary, but 10% was paid by Hospital Alliance, who could consult with me on issues involving the not-for-profit. So,
and while their interests weren't really in conflict, they weren't really unified. They didn't want to merge.
yeah, well, I think there had been that history of the battles between Baptist and HCA, and battles between Jackson Madison and West Tennessee and HCA, and then community health systems. So there was still that memory of that, and I think they felt that they needed their own organization, and they lasted a long time. It was just a couple of 3 years ago the Hospital Alliance ended up funding its stint and really kind of merged with THA.
So
It eventually happened. We were just probably 20 years too soon.
So how long were you in that position?
I was with Hospital Alliance a little over a year, with Hospital Association, probably a year and a half, probably 3 years total for both. I kind of roll them together because I ended up kind of working with both of them.
And what happened after that year and a half, or the time that you spent there? What did you do?
With the Maine Hospital Association, it was the same sort
of work, but
more with Mike Huggins, who was their government relations guy. But I still work closely with Adrian Nestrick because she became the executive director of Hospital Alliance. And I also was involved in doing some of the legal work for Craig Backer in the hospital today. So it's basically the same work, mostly government relations, lobbying.
what led you to make any change?
You mean
Job-wise?
Tennessee Hospital Association? Mike and I kept talking about my salary. I think I was close to.
Well, it's weird. You're getting a salary from one and
Yeah, it totals close to maybe, I don't know, 80 or 90,000, something like that.
Which was a little step down from what you had been making.
Well, maybe not. Yeah, I mean, it was basically the same.
Oh, okay.
It was basically the same. But we had been talking about doing something about that. And I got this call from a lady I knew over at Vanderbilt. And they wanted me to come work in their general counsel's office.
Who was general counsel then?
David Williams.
Okay.
And David had just recently come on board, although he wasn't the one I think that made the decision. It was really John Callison and Julia Morris were his two deputies, and they were kind of the ones in charge of hiring. Although I guess David could veto anything that morning, but he usually did. So Julia Morris was on the healthcare side, and she really they wanted me, Betty Nixon was over there too. So they really wanted me to help them with a take care of stuff and government relations, just lots of other things. And they offered more money, but they also offered this benefit at Vanderbilt that they would pay your child's education, college education, 70% of whatever Vanderbilt charged wherever they went. A heck of a benefit when you got a child who's, middle school, I think at that time. And so
It's a big benefit.
huge benefit. And Vanderbilt's where I went to school. It was kind of like going home for me. And so I remember Mike was really upset. He said, "Why? You need to stay with us." And I said, "Mike, I said, you're offering more money." I said, "This is just a money deal. And going to work for one of your good members." And so I ended up going up there.
Okay, so what were some of the first memories you had when you went to work over at Vanderbilt?
First memories was that was the same about the time that we had the World Tower. As I'm getting up that morning and arrive at Vanderbilt, and we're seeing these planes flying into the towers in New York City. Has nothing to do with the law, but I can still remember that happened right when I started at Vanderbilt.
I don't think anybody who was around at that time of 9/11 would ever forget
Would forget
towers
that.
in
It's
New
kind of
York
like
City
for me and
falling.
you remember the Kennedy assassination. I always remember where I was. Kennedy, I was in second grade of all things, but I remember the Kennedy assassination. I remember 9/11. And at Vanderbilt, it was kind of fun because John Callison, who headed up the university side, he basically, none of his attorneys wanted to go to court anytime. So anytime there was a court proceeding, he would ask me to do it if they weren't going to farm it out, if it weren't, something that they needed to farm out. So I ended up going to court a few times. I ended up working a lot. Sheree Wright was there. Things come around. Ran into Sheree again because she was a university counsel when I was at Vanderbilt. So I helped her with workers' comp, learned workers' comp from Sheree. Because I didn't know it. I think I appeared in front of a chancellor called Carol McCoy on a workers' comp case too for Vanderbilt. I remember you ruled against me, Carol.
Oh.
But I know what you were doing. Very sympathetic too.
Well, tell me about appearing before Judge Muriel Robinson.
That was another case, an interesting case, a good war story. We had a nurse who was based in my hospital, and a parent comes in, and the parent and her husband are divorced, and they have custody arrangement on the child. And at 5 o'clock that afternoon, the child was supposed to be transferred to the husband. And the mother comes into the nurse and says, "My child's sick. I want you to let me take her home because she doesn't need to go with her dad because she's sick." And the nurse agreed. And so the woman refused to give up the child to the husband. The husband sued for contempt of the order. It was in front of Judge Muriel Robinson, who was the circuit judge who handled all the family law matters at that time. And we all know Judge Robinson, I love Judge Robinson, but she was a tough judge. I mean, she didn't work anybody, violating orders. So I got with the nurse, and John Callison knew this too. We talked about it. I said, "John, don't worry, I'll have the nurse well prepped by the time we get there." So I got with the nurse and I said, "You need to understand, this judge is not going to be happy with you telling this mother to disobey this order, and you need to apologize."
And the nurse had written a note.
She'd written a note basically saying that the mother could take the child.
And didn't have to turn it over to the dad.
Because the child was sick. And she'd gotten in the middle of something she shouldn't have gotten the note about. So I told her, I said, "Now, we're going to be at the end of the docket. I want you to watch what happens. Because you're going to see a lot of people coming in for not paying child support, and she's going to order them to be put in handcuffs and let out of the court and going to the jail. That's what she does when people are under contempt of her order. You watch that. And when we get to our case, you don't say a word. You let me stand up and basically mea culpa, we're sorry, we're never going to do it again." So sure enough, we get to the hearing, and Muriel, just like I said, she's sending them out right and left in handcuffs. You can pay child support, you can spend some time in jail. So we get to our case, and she said, Mr. Young, I understand you're here for Vanderbilt. Yes, Your Honor. And Mr. Young, you know, my order says what it says, and no one's to interfere with that, including your client. I said, yes, Your Honor. She said, you talk to your client, you talk to that lady back there about this. Yes, Your Honor, I've explained that she will never do it again. She's very apologetic. And we understand it. And she just didn't understand time, but she now knows. And she said, okay, and one bite the apple, you go. And by this time, our nurse, I mean, she's never going to interfere in any family life either again. But that was
She thought you saved her from going to jail and handcuffs.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, you had several Vanderbilt stories while you were working there.
Yeah, it's a great place.
The once in a lifetime opportunity story with Vicki Gregg, who ran 10 care for Blue Cross Blue Shield. What was that?
That's how I ended up leaving Vanderbilt. I got a call one day from what we call, all lawyers know, headhunters. And it was a headhunter, and they were looking for people to apply for general counsel for Blue Cross Blue Shield and compliance officer too. Same position, but had both titles. And they called and they asked me if I knew anyone who might be interested. Well, I know Vicki Gregg from my days in 10 care. We were good friends. And so I called her after I got off with the headhunter. Vicki, I said, do you really want to know some names, or are you asking me if I'm interested in this job? And she said, well, don't, Bill, I told them to ask you if you were interested in a job. That's why they called you. And I said, well, that's what I thought. And I think I would be interested. And she said, well, we've got to go through an interview process, but I would really like for you to apply because, I mean, your background and your history, I think you really do a good job.
She was the new CEO of Blue Cross?
She had just been appointed the chief executive officer of Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Pretty nice.
Pretty nice job, pretty great opportunity. But I also told her at that time there was governor's race going on. And I committed to the Republican candidate, Emory, to help him, which I was doing. And there was a possibility that if he won, that I might be offered a position to do the 10 care stuff in that administration. At least I think we had talked about it enough that opportunity might have been there. Fortunately for me, Emory lost. Got my brothers and won. And I got through the interview process. It was a long process, but they offered me the job at Blue Cross, and the deal was that we had to move to Chattanooga, and Jane had to give up her job in order to do that, or at least she wanted to give up her job. First time, she was at that time staff attorney at Pittsburgh.
Okay.
So we moved to Chattanooga in 2002. We took that job.
You took a lot of tests, drug tests, and
oh yeah, you had to take a drug test, you had to take a psych test. I still remember Vicki never told me the results of my psych test, except one time about 6 years into my tenure there, I asked her, I said, whatever happened with that psych test? And she said, maybe we shouldn't talk about that. And I said, well, I'll tell you something. I took that psych test at probably midnight one night, and I thought it was the stupidest thing I've ever taken in my life. I mean, asking me, my wife and I were on a plane and there was only one parachute, which one was going to go out? And, really? But anyway, a lot of people believe in us, like our HR folks. Really,
there was a real incentive, not only an incentive to work with Vicki, but this was a substantial step up pay-wise.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was, as a friend of mine said, who I discussed this opportunity with, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I mean, the pay was it would cover my salary, Jane's salary, and beyond. And that was just the
yearly
salary. What I didn't realize at the time, they had a bonus program, and the bonus program basically would double the salary. Blue Cross did well, and they usually did well.
Are you able to talk about how much you were offered annually?
Sure, I don't know why. At the time, it was,
Probably public record somewhere.
yeah, probably it was 255,000. And it increased significantly as the years went on.
And how many years were you there?
About 9 or 10.
Okay, tell me a little bit about your job responsibilities, because we're going through how your career developed.
Yeah, I mean, it was, there were probably 5 people that were direct reports to Vicki that helped her run Blue Cross during that time, and I was one of the 5. And the other 4, and we all worked together as a team. She had no real number 2. It was 5 of us kind of reporting to her. And my responsibilities were legal, obviously, as general counsel. Initially, compliance, security, provider audit, internal audit. Seems I'm missing something. But basically, claims audit. There were, a lot of departments that reported up through my chain of 700 employees at the end of the day. So it wasn't just being the general counsel, it was responsibility for other departments, particularly around audit and security and governance, corporate governance. Also.
And Blue Cross Blue Shield probably is the biggest.
The biggest insurer in the state.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
You did some lobbying on behalf of Blue Cross Blue Shield?
Initially, I mean, really the government relations was handled by a government relations team, but I retained my lobbyist registration for a year or 2, just to be on the safe side. And then finally, Dave Locke, who I'd worked with in the Sunquist administration, and it was the main lobbyist, main government relations guy for Blue Cross at the time. He said, "Bill, we don't need you to do that. You're our attorney." And so I gave up my lobbyist, but I still spent a lot of time going to Nashville and working on government relations matters with Dave, primarily in legal support. Was
there a situation involving provider negotiations?
Yes, when I first arrived there, HCA, Corporation of America, I talked to the guy because I knew him through my days at THA, who headed up.
For those who don't do a lot of insurance, just give a 1 or 2 sentence explanation of provider negotiations. You've got the insurance company, and you've got HCA or healthcare provider of some sort, right?
Yeah, basically what the insurance company does is because they represent employers on one side. They provide provider networks to employers and pay the claims as they come in. But Blue Cross, they also did that on the Medicaid side as a TennCare, managed care organization. So hospitals and doctors most of their business is going to come through insurance payments. And so Blue Cross would negotiate provider arrangements, particularly with hospitals and doctor groups and other groups, pharmacy contracts.
And are those contracts usually a year, or are they multi-year?
Multi-years, could be a year. It just depends on how things are going. You generally wanted them longer than a year because you didn't want to have to negotiate those things every year because they were always tough negotiations. So when I arrived and was getting ready to go to Blue Cross, I talked to the guy at HCA. I knew their contract was up with Blue Cross. I said, "You guys gonna have any problems with Blue Cross?" And I went down there. I don't want to step into that. They're the biggest hospital company in Tennessee. Okay. And he said, "Oh no, we're gonna work that out before you even get there." And I asked Vicki Gregg the same thing. She said, "I'm gonna work it out if you get here." I've been there a week, and HCA walked out of the network, provider network of Blue Cross, and within 2 weeks, or 3 weeks, we were in mediation, trying to get a contract, and that went on for the first 2 years of my tenure there.
2 years of negotiations?
I mean, it seemed like 2 years. Maybe it was a year.
I think you told me Dan Elrod was with you.
Yeah, Dan Elrod was representing us. We hired him to represent us in the mediation. HCA was represented by Steve Riley, thank you. And we had the mediator was Howard Vogel out of Knoxville. We had all settled on Howard, who's great. It still is a great mediator. and he did a really good job. Unfortunately, Steve and HCA weren't going to budge, and the mediation fell apart. And then after that, myself and the provider representative on our side and their provider folks kind of did some quiet discussions, and we ultimately got to a deal. So
Finally, after 2 years.
yeah, it was a long time. There was a lot of threats going on. It was very public. A lot of work in the legislature, bills being filed for left and right. So,
And how were other efforts on provider negotiations after that experience? Did you find it to be as equally?
yeah, I mean, that was probably the most difficult, but they were
contentious.
always, some were always difficult. I always give HCA credit to them. It was always a business. For the not-for-profits, it was more personal, seemed more personal with Vanderbilt. I worked there. But they seemed to take it personally that when we would negotiate a lower rate. But sometimes we won some of those, sometimes we lost. I remember there was one early on where we had I got a call from the CEO at Blunt Memorial up in Maryville. And he said, Bill, he said, you know, this contract, it says exactly what we say it says, and y'all are now not paying us the amount we think we're owed. So I go to provider relations guys, what's going on here? He said, no, we know that what they're talking about, we never signed that. So I said, well, I know Joe Dawson. Joe Dawson was the CEO. I said, let's go up there and talk to him. And we'll find out what's going on. So we walk into the meeting, and Dawson hands me an amendment that the guy who was in charge of provider relations before I got there, apparently he never bought a copy of this damn thing home, but it was signed by him. And so I looked at it. I handed it to our provider relations guy, and he looked at it. He said, I said, can you give us a second, Joe? Let's talk. I said, Joe Dawson, his guy, Lady Lee for him. And I said, Mark, I said, we're stuck. This is exactly what he says it is. We signed it.
It's always
so
bracing when you find out.
Yeah. And we didn't have a copy in our record because the provider relations guy who had left, he and Vicky had not got along, so he didn't leave under favorable circumstances. And so anyway, he, for whatever reason, never got back. And so Joe comes back in the room, and I said, but Joe, I said, you know, it looks like you've got that. Y'all don't want to charge us interest on this amount, do you? I mean, can we just pay you and move on? And he said, sure. And I remember Mark Austin, who was our provider relations guy, we walked back out. There was free parking in our parking lot. And Mark looked at me, he said, you know, I thought this was free parking, but we just paid a lot of money to park in this guy's parking lot. So yeah, funny story. Those provider relations were always tough.
You mentioned that this position, and I will say compensation was good, but you said it was a very high stress position.
Yes.
And that probably some of the hardest aspects of it were HR.
Yes. When you have to let people go, some people take it well, some people not so well, and we would have some tense, and those always ended up with us as representing HR, and we had some really tough discussions with people who we ended up having to leave, some very senior people, and you'd have to work out the severance package. And like I say, some people, they understood, they take a severance package, and it was no hard feelings, but some, it were very hard feelings.
What were some significant memories that you had while you were with Blue Cross Blue Shield? Some of the fun things, not stressful. I think you said Bill Corker was.
Well, I enjoyed working with Vicky. Vicky was a friend before I went there, despite the fact that we would sometimes have different opinions. She always respected my opinion. We had the same arrangement that Bob Corbin had. I tell this generally of anyone I'm working for, that I'm going to tell you what I think. That's what I think a good attorney does. And you can take it or leave it. And I'll still be with you, and we're not going to take it personally. And so Vicky and I had that arrangement that Corker and I had. It worked pretty well. I remember one of the other senior folks, one of the five that were reporting Vicky, telling me, he said, if I told her the things you're telling her, I'd be fired. And I said, well, you know, if I am fired, I'm fired. I'm going to tell her the truth. And so I did. Sometimes that's hard to do.
It is hard,
It's very
but
hard
it's
to do.
also,
And they may not want to hear it.
well, it's sticking to your principles of doing the right thing as a lawyer, and
And
that's giving your best advice.
And I have to give her credit. She took it, and she understood I was always going to be with her at the end of the day.
She's not a lawyer.
No, she was not. She was a nurse by trade.
Okay. So, you had a farm bureau relationship?
Yes, Vicky put me in charge of our relationship with Farm Bureau. At that time, Blue Cross Blue Shield administered. Farm Bureau has its own health insurance program for its members, and Blue Cross provided the provider network, and the processing of claims. And so I was basically would go down to Columbia and negotiate out any problems. But I mean, I always thought the guys at Farm Bureau were great to work with. And I thought it was a mutually beneficial relationship. So we didn't have many problems with them. Unfortunately, after I left, that relationship fell apart. But any event, they were always very supportive at Farm Bureau. And the reason I wanted to always be with them is their political network throughout the state is extremely strong. They have offices in every county in the state, and they're very politically active. And they have a lot of members through their health insurance and their auto insurance and homeowners insurance. I mean, they're very strong politically.
And how did things change after Vicky decided to leave? How long was it that she stayed in the position?
Well, Vicky, it was about my entire tenure. She was the CEO. When she announced she was retiring, Jane and I pretty much decided we wanted to get back to Nashville.
And how many years were you there?
About 9 or 10.
Okay.
Between 9 and 10.
But she decided she was leaving.
Yeah, Bill Haslam had just been elected governor. I'd been very involved in working with Bill Haslam in his campaign, even though he beat a real good friend of mine, Michael Porter. But I was a Republican, and Mike was a really good friend. Mike would have been a great governor too. But anyway, so I was looking to get back to Nashville in some capacity. Vicky announced her retirement, and I'd known Bob Cooper for a long time, and Bob and I had continuing discussions about me coming back to Nashville, and he was looking for Solicitor General for the Attorney General's office. I always loved that office, still love that office. And Bob and I worked in agreement when I would come back, even though I had a more lucrative offer from a local law firm. But Bob Cooper is a great guy to work with, and that was.
But you worked it out so that on the legal side, you actually didn't retire or leave until August 31st.
Yeah, August 31st,
2011.
2011, when I turned 55. Yeah.
And what was significant about that?
Because when I turned 55 at Blue Cross Blue Shield, I got a nice benefit. Paid a lot of money for the next 3 years.
But
and so that was nice. One of my senior folks, the same guy who said told me that he'd be fired if he said that stuff to Vicky. He told me, he said, "You're not going to leave before you turn 55, are you? You're going to leave a lot of money sitting on that table." And Bob Cooper was very nice. He worked it out where I could stay on with Blue Cross until I turned 55.
So you did stay on, and you were working
Bob Cooper for 3 months for free.
as the Solicitor General?
And, well, I didn't have the title. I just kind of came into the office and worked for free. I had enough PTO time at Blue Cross where I could do that.
But on September 1, after you left Blue
then I
Cross
became
Blue Shield,
Solicitor.
you actually became the Solicitor
Right.
General, right?
Uh-huh.
And what did that involve? I don't know a lot of people who have the opportunity to serve as the Solicitor General.
Well, there aren't many because that position didn't exist until Mike Moore held it.
You held it quite a while, didn't you?
Yeah, Mike held it for quite a while, but he was the first Solicitor General since probably 1850. They kind of recreated the position and put Mike into it. Mike was a wonderful lawyer, great guy, and unfortunately passed away. And that's how I got the opportunity to take the job. They've been looking for almost a year, I think, for someone to take Mike's place. And so basically what Solicitor General did is oversaw all the appellate work that the AG's office did, as well as opinions that the AG issued, and then working with the Attorney General, the Chief Deputy, as part of a team. And that's the way Bob had it set up. There were about team 5 of us and kind of worked together.
And that position you held for about a year, and then what happened?
Well, I got a call and Bob got a call about the same time from Chief Justice Gary Wade. And he wanted to have me become the new Director of Administrative Office and Courts. He asked Bob's permission to talk to me about that.
Okay.
And probably political reasons why he wanted to be over there. I mean, at that time, Ron Ramsey was the Speaker of the Senate. Ronnie made it clear he was going to oppose the 3 Democrats on the Supreme Court in the yes/no retention election. And I think they were looking for a Republican that they could thought might be able to help them with Speaker Ramsey and convince him not to do that. And unfortunately, I couldn't. Even though I took the job, I tried. But they won re-election anyways. I thought they would. Yeah, I met with all the Supreme Court justices and decided to take the job. A significant pay increase. And also you got, and you know this, Carol, from your time as Chancellor, that pension benefits for the state are much better in a judicial position than they are as a regular state employee. And this Director of Administrative Office of Courts got that bump up on the pension too. So
one of the things that you said as a condition of your taking the position, though, was that you got to hire.
Yeah, the only condition I had was that I got to hire my assistant executive director, or assistant director. And I was convinced that I needed Anna Escobar to do that job.
And why so?
Anna and I had gotten to know each other through we both on the Judicial Nominating Commission together. I thought the world of Anna. She'd been over the DA's office. I knew she was good from an organization standpoint. And I saw my job, I was going to have to go out and travel around and meet a bunch of judges and also do a lot of work at the legislature. There was other things they also wanted. They were trying to get a pay increase at the time. And so I needed someone who could handle the day-to-day at the office. And I thought Anna could do that. And she could do it. And so, and that was kind of, I always have believed that you need to hire people smarter than you to help you out. And I just got to know her and thought the world of Anna. And it did. It worked out great. She was a great number 2.
And as you are doing all of this work on behalf of the trial judges and appellate judges, going around the state, working, and Anna's helping with the central staff.
Right.
About a year after you'd been there, you applied for a position as the Attorney General?
Yes, the Attorney General position came open. Well, I shouldn't say it came open. It was clear that the Supreme Court was not going to reappoint Bob Cooper as Attorney General. And so I've always thought the world of that office. I love the work I did there. I think it's the most fun job in the state, to say to be quite honest. And so I applied for it. I did not know that Herbert Slatery, who was the general counsel to Governor Haslam, was going to apply. And he did. If I had known that, I probably wouldn't have applied because I thought Herbert would get that. But in any event, I applied, and so did Herbert, so did Bob. Ended up applying at the end of the day. And they appointed Herbert Slatery. That's what the court did.
And when they appointed him, did you then have an opportunity to talk to him?
Yes, we had a long conversation. I told him I love that office and I'd like to help him if there's any way I could. And we ended up, I ended up transitioning back to the Attorney General's office.
And what were your job responsibilities then?
Basically part again of the senior management team, helping Herbert, their General Slattery, in his startup of the office, troubleshooting, basically. We came up with some title that I can't even remember the name of the title, but some title he gave me. But it was just basically troubleshooting, working with him to set up.
At that time, I think one of the legislators, Jeremy Durham, had
Yes.
been very controversial.
Right, when we were charged, the state attorney general's office was charged with doing an investigation, and I was
What
involved.
was the nature of that?
So Representative Durham was accused of having inappropriate relationships with females. Certain of them were lobbyists, and that was the primary charge against him, is that he was using his office inappropriately.
So did you get involved in that investigation?
Yes.
And how long did that take?
It was still ongoing by the time I left, so it was a good 6, 8 months. I think the final report was issued right before I left. And I was in charge of helping the people interview legislators and others. I was the one that had to go over and break the news to members of the General Assembly that we wanted to talk to them about Representative Durham, and set up times for those interviews.
Never.
And then also look at the final report and have input into the final report.
And what happened?
Basically, the report confirmed that he did have inappropriate contact. He'd been harassing female members.
Did he leave?
He was expelled by the General Assembly.
Oh, well, gotcha.
And that report was instrumental in causing them to vote to expel.
As you said, HR is never easy.
It's never easy. And sometimes, and I'm sure to this day, Representative Durham didn't think he did anything wrong. General Assembly did.
So Andre Blumstein, who you went to law school with, reappears because she became
a Solicitor General
while you're there.
While I'm there, and that was fun working with Andre.
And you said that, I don't know if you went to the U.S. Supreme Court with her when there was the same-sex marriage case.
Yeah, actually, Joe Whalen on our staff argued that for the state, and I was responsible for working with Joe, getting him prepared, as was Andre.
So you did all the prep work with Andre and getting him.
Yeah, and I traveled up to DC where he had a couple of moot arguments, and actually went to the U.S. Supreme Court to sit and hear the argument that Joe did. General Slater was there as well, and that was very interesting. Joe did a really good job. We lost the case, but it was a hard case to win. It was a 5-4 decision.
Yeah.
Basically, Justice Kennedy turning that tide.
I think you said that you, as a result of that, helped negotiate the attorney's fees for the prevailing party.
Once we lost, Bill Harbinson and others were representing the other side, and the case had started out in front of Judge Trotter, and they came back and they asked for a lot of attorney's fees, a lot. And General Slater, he didn't think they were entitled to as much as they were asking for, and so he charged me to work with Bill Harbinson and see what we could do.
And another friend of yours, right?
Another friend. Well, in this profession, we shouldn't, even though we disagree with each other, we should never not be friends with each other.
Well, I think it reflects in a positive way on you that in your negotiation skills, whether you're doing provider contracts and you have some very contentious attorneys on both sides that take 2 years, and ultimately when they fade away, there you are putting the package together. And the same thing for difficult litigation involving the state, and when the prevailing party wins, you're the one that kind of brings harmony, which is
Hopefully.
which is really a credit to any lawyer, that you can get a final resolution that lets the parties walk away.
Right. You can get there. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't.
Well, you're in this position where you are working with the new AG, and you've gone to the Sixth Circuit, you've done several things. How long did you stay?
Basically, a little over a year, because at that time, I think it was Charles Slater, he mentioned it to me, that this wonderful chancellor in Davidson County was going to retire. And that I should be looking and applying for that position, and that would be something that would be good. We'd maybe get a Republican chancellor in Davidson County. And so, of course, that was your position, giving you a little bit of a hard time. But so I decided to apply for that. My good friend Paul and I also applied for that. And it was the gentleman that he was just a family law judge. He was appointed to that and lost to Stephanie Williams. He applied as well. Great guy. And I'm trying to remember the name.
I am too.
But you know him as well as I do, and he was a great. And we all went in, and I think there were 5 of us that ultimately applied for your position. And I was fortunate enough to be chosen by Governor Haslam. I can remember I was in Atlantic City at some baseball card convention, and Dwight Tarwater called me on my cell. And usually the way it works is, if you're going to get the job, the governor calls you. And if you're not going to get the job, the general counsel for the governor calls. At that time, Dwight was general counsel for Governor Haslam. So as soon as I was phone, it says, Bill, is this Dwight? I said, oh, I guess I didn't get it. He said, oh no. I just wanted to be the first to say, congratulations, Your Honor.
And now he is going to be on, well, he is on the Supreme Court. Dwight Tarwater.
Dwight Tarwater is now on the Supreme Court.
And you were stepping up to become Chancellor in Davidson County.
And I would be remiss in not saying this for the posterity, that your help, and when I took that job, I couldn't have done that job without your help and the staff you left behind. And it's a credit to you that even though we are politically different, that we were able to work so closely together, and you were able to help me out in so many ways in doing that job, hopefully doing it well.
Well, thank you. And I think you would probably confirm that as a chancellor, it really didn't matter which political party that you came from. The rulings that you have to issue are really based on, in many instances, not the common law, but so much statutory laws. And it is a court that involves both the state and the issues involving the state. And who better than you, with the wide experience that you had, from bankruptcy to tax to insurance, I mean, to be a chancellor.
It was, as you well know, you did it well for the many years you were there. It's the most fun job in the state. I say the AG's office is much fun, but the second, it's certainly being a chancellor, given what you get to see. And I mean, and we even got jury trials. You get a jury. When I was practicing in tax, I mean, the chancellors rarely heard jury trials. We were hearing a lot by the time you and I were there. So it was a fun 2 years doing that. And I again appreciate all your help in helping me learn how to do that. I mean, the best advice you ever gave me was, Bill, you have a lot in front of you. You don't need to take it under advisement unless you need to. You do your homework and you make the decision from the bench if you can. And that was the best advice I got, because I tried to do that. And you were right, it came fast and furious.
Well, you had a few interesting cases while you were there. One that had to do with the ouster of a sheriff.
Yes, I agreed to this was a Rutherford County sheriff, and of course all the Rutherford County judges refused to touch that case, and they were trying to oust him. and it seemed like they had good reason to oust him. But none of the other judges in Davidson wanted to handle it, and I think our presiding judge came to me, and Judge Binkley, and he said, Bill, would you take this case? And I said, well, sure, I think it'd be fun. And it was. I mean, the subject matter was tough, but it was fun. Good lawyers on both sides. And all were representing the sheriff, and then lawyers from Rutherford County, or good lawyers down there representing the DA who were trying to oust him, and ultimately I found in favor of the DA that I had the authority to oust him.
And then you had one involving the Titans and the stadium.
That was, and that was, it was more the lawyers involved, and the subject matter. I was interested in the Titans were getting ready to expel their longtime vendor. And the vendor claimed that they couldn't do it under the contract. And so the lawyers involved representing the Titans was Bob Boston, representing the vendor, whose name I'm forgetting, but not the vendor's name.
Okay.
Gary Shockley was representing the vendor. And it was, and you've seen them before, two of the best lawyers in the state. And very different in their techniques. I mean, Bob's kind of the old country lawyer, but very, well prepared, but just very smooth. And Gary Shockley, who knows cases off the top of his head and has all the law behind him without even looking at any notes, he just knows it. And I told him at the end of that argument, and I ended up ruling, I think, for the Titans, because they had, in my opinion, the better part of the argument. But I said, gentlemen, it was just a pleasure to sit here and listen to you two guys. Y'all both did great work for your clients. And they did.
You had another case involving, I think, an effort to move a cemetery.
That was a tough one. That one, I think,
Did you say it was a tough one?
Well, it was a tough situation. A tough situation. Former councilman was representing some car owners who wanted to basically move the cemetery, move bodies in the cemetery to another location so they could take the land that was the cemetery and use it to expand their car business. And so he ends up in our court, and he has a motion to do that, to basically dig up the people and bury them over in another cemetery and take the property. And he says no one's opposing it. He says he's given notice to the world, as he's required to do by statute. And so I take it back, and your clerk, Julie, and I look at it, and I said, well, Julie, it's just makes sense no one's done up. But I guess if he's given the proper notice, we need to sign this, move on. Well, as soon as we signed it, there was a motion to reconsider within a couple of weeks from people, the relatives of the folks who were in that cemetery who had not gotten notice. And as it turns out, the lawyer, the councilman representing Volvo, he had not done the notice, not done the public notice he's required to do. And he pretty much admitted he had. And I told him, I said, well, that's too bad, because that's fatal. And not only is it fatal to your argument, but it's also going to require me to report you to the Board of Professional Responsibility, because if you signed a piece of paper saying you'd given that notice, and that had been to Chancellor Lyle, because it was in her court initially. And I said, I can't ignore that. I am bound by the Board of Professional Responsibility myself to give them notice that you've done this. And I said, you can explain it to them. He tried to explain it. I said, no, I don't need to hear your explanation. You have to explain it to them, because you basically didn't do what you said you did on a piece of paper filed with this court. And that's a pretty serious offense. It was sad. He was very apologetic, but I don't know what happened there.
So during those 2 years,
I can only imagine how much fun you had in the years you were on the court. I had 2 years, I had all these cases.
The number of memorable cases that come back on occasion, and you realize how fortunate you were to have that position.
Yeah.
And as I just covered, 3 of the cases that you had, You were there for about 2 years,
Yeah, 2 years.
and then what did you decide to do?
Well, as you know, Carol, you and I've talked about this. I'm a Republican, and I really thought when I took the position, and I told the governor that I would run for election when the opportunity came, and I
And that was required because, again,
Right.
for people who don't know, when somebody retires in the middle of their term, the appointee has to run at the next.
next election, which was a year and a half down the road.
Right.
So I really thought I could run. I have a lot of friends on both sides of the aisle.
Right.
I worked really hard with my Democratic friends and talking, trying to convince them to support me. Some I was able to get a commitment out of, some not. And but at the end of the day, as we got about a year into it, it became obvious to me that the political climate was such that I would not, I didn't care how much money I had, I couldn't win. I didn't think I could win. The Democrats, basically, before I was in appointed, they had a candidate. The current chancellor, Ann Martin, had called me and said she wasn't going to run because she liked me, but as time went by and I had made decisions, she finally called up and said she was thinking of running. I said, Ann, I said, no, anyone can run. You should run. You're a friend of mine. If I don't run and you run, I'm going to support you because you can be a good chancellor. And if I do decide to run, we'll have fun with it.
Right.
But I ultimately decided not to run. There was this guy named Donald Trump running for president at that time. While he was very well thought of in most of Tennessee, he wasn't well thought of in Davidson County, and I'd have to be on the same ballot or close to the same ballot. I'd be running in August. No, August, because actually November, because it would have been, it's a partisan, shouldn't be partisan.
No, it shouldn't be.
Trying to argue that for years, but no, it would have been November. I would have been running against a Democrat, and with Trump on the ticket, I could have $1 million, and people tend to vote Republican, Democrat on those things.
About this time, your longtime friend John Ryder calls you.
Yes, and he knew I was leaving, and I decided not to run for election, and he was interested in starting a Nashville office for his Memphis firm.
Okay.
And I told John, I said, well, I'm not going to run, so sounds a good place for me to land. And I said, but I'm going to get back into state government at some point in time. I understand I'm not serious about doing this long term. And he seemed to think I should be serious about it. And I ended up working in that Nashville office for a year. And I didn't make a lot of money, but didn't want to, so I didn't care. I was drawing my state retirement then, and I was just having fun working with John Ryder.
So what did you decide to do?
Ultimately, another friend of mine, Tom Lawless, who you and I both know, Tom called me up and said, hey, I want you to apply to be the new executive director for the Tennessee Bureau of Ethics and Campaign Finance. And I actually had already applied to be a claims commissioner for Middle Tennessee because that position came up. And unfortunately for me, I didn't get appointed to that position. But ultimately I did get, the board did select me to serve as the new executive director for the Bureau of Ethics and Campaign Finance, which is where I am today.
And what does that job entail?
Basically, that job reports to Bureau of Ethics and Campaign Finance is composed of 12 members, half Democrat, half Republican by statute. We deal the registry, which is 6 members, and then the Ethics Commission, 6 members. They're really 2 separate things. The registry oversees campaign finance reporting requirements in Tennessee. They're much more contentious at the end of the day than the Ethics Commission. The Ethics Commission oversees lobbying, lobby registration. All public officials have to file statements of interest with the state. Candidates do too, that basically are a series of questions designed to identify potential conflicts of interest. With us annually, there are 9,000 or 10,000 of them a year file, more than you would think. Right. And then the Ethics Commission has a small slice of ethics for certain members of state government.
I think you described this position as 90% boredom and 10% sheer terror.
Yeah, like a lobbyist.
Why would you think or describe a position that has to do with a Bureau of Ethics and Finance? About 10% sheer terror. Why is that?
Because of the issues that we have to be kind of like lobbying, when you know, everything's going along fine. You've got periods of where it's boredom, which general assembly is not in session, but then you get some very tough issues that come in front of it. Those are the 10% sheer terror. We had the registry board, the civil penalty levied against Jeremy Durham. The civil penalty ultimately levied against former state senator and mayor of Rutherford County, Bill Ketchum. Those are very tough issues. Now, I don't have to make the decision on those. The registry board makes the ultimate decision, but we have to do the work, and the press is always interested in those. They're always calling us. And so when things go awry, we get calls.
There been resolution on those two that mentioned?
Yes.
Oh,
Civil penalty was assessed the largest, I think, ever. Representative Durham.
how much was that?
Over 400,000. And Bill Ketchum was around 200,000, which he has paid.
And then I think you mentioned Glenn Casada.
Casada.
Okay.
He also had some issues with the registry board. Perhaps not as serious as the other two, but they generate a lot of publicity. And he ultimately paid a penalty, I think it was $100,000. And most of his involved just not maintaining documentation to back up.
And is that true for most of the situations? People don't maintain their records?
That's different. It depends.
Everyone.
The Jeremy Durham situation was a lot of different things, and that actually started before I got there. I was just at the end. Bill Ketchum was a sad situation. He had his daughter as his campaign finance treasurer, and she just didn't do it. And so it was totally inaccurate, documents not available, and we paid the price for that.
Well, that's where you are today.
Yes.
So let me turn now to.
We've gotten to the end.
We're close to the end. We really want to know about community activities and career overview. That's where I'm taking you now. And one of the things is your involvement with either local or state bar associations and other, I would say, professional organizations.
Yeah. And I've been very involved, particularly in the last 15 years with bar associations, both local and state, and even some of the federal ones. I'm a member of the Nashville Bar, Tennessee Bar, American Bar Association, and American Health Lawyers Association.
And a fellow with, and you are a fellow with.
I'm a fellow with all TBA, MBA, and ABA. It just means I'm old, Carol. and that they wanted the money that you have to pay in order to be a fellow. But anyway, but I've gotten more involved in those. I was involved with the Chattanooga Bar Association when I was with Blue Cross. We did a lot of work with Chattanooga Bar, particularly reach out to high school students explaining what law was. I tried to encourage our lawyers to work with them to help our community. The other thing I'm most proud of, and Andy Branham, and Andy's since passed away, but I give Andy a lot of the credit for doing this. But he and I came up with the idea over lunch one day when I was at Blue Cross. He was saying, how can corporations in Tennessee help the Bar Association? And I said, well, Andy, I said, you know, our lawyers are all busy, but one thing we've all got is money. We should be able to have maybe an annual fundraiser and generate money for our, local bar association legal aid societies. And so as a result of those conversations over lunch one day, and it still goes on the TBA as every year, corporate fundraiser.
Yes, they do.
And I was involved in that when I was at Blue Cross, even some years after Blue Cross. I'm not involved with it as much now. But I give Andy a lot of credit for getting that off the ground, and the guy down in Memphis, he's currently the head of it. He had a lot to do with it too. But proud of the fact that we raised so much money to help our legal aid society.
I think you had told me that not only that is a good influence in the local community, but that you also, as far as in Nashville, have been a volunteer at Park Center.
Yes, I've been on Park Center's board since probably the early nineties. Park Center provides mental health services and housing services to those who in need, who are mentally have a mental illness but don't have the money to get the treatment or the housing that they need to get. And also the other thing they do that to me is critical is they try to get them jobs and on their feet. And so Park Center is kind of Davidson County centric, but I can't, I'm just on the board. The people that are there do the really hard work, but it is good work, and they've made a difference in a number of people's lives.
Who would you say has had a strong influence on your career?
Carol McCoy.
Well, no. Let's start. I'm
serious
Paine.
on that.
George
I
Paine.
know you're you should take credit too. I mean, early on, George Paine was a real mentor to me. He was my first real boss. John Ryder, who unfortunately has passed away. But John Ryder was like a big brother, and being a lawyer, he was always helpful to me in navigating my career. Those were kind of both of those guys were kind of my go-to of folks when I wanted career advice. Vicki Gregg's another one. Vicki would sit down and talk to me and be very honest. And she gave me an opportunity that, is a heck of an opportunity that I had to work with her. But there's so many others that.
Well, I think you had already touched on Tom Lawless and Bob Corker.
Tom Lawless and Bob Corker. Bob certainly, during that point when he was F&A commissioner and then later mayor of Chattanooga when I was in Chattanooga, and then U.S. Senator. And Tom Lawless has been a dear friend since we began serving on the Judicial Nominating Commission together.
And there's somebody very close to you who's been a big influence.
My wife.
You shouldn't forget her.
Yeah, and I shouldn't forget her.
Jane.
I wouldn't be where I was without Jane.
And I think you have covered both Larry Lewis and Ron Ramsey.
Yeah, Larry, Ron was very helpful, man. I didn't know Ron that well until he appointed me to the Judicial Nominating Commission. I got to know him even better after that. It's always been a friend. And of course, Larry Lewis I've known for forever. And he was my boss for many years, but also my friend. And that's the other thing. When you work with people, you develop strong friendships over the years.
What was the impact of your career on your family and family life?
Early on, hectic. I can remember Jane and I basically throwing our child from one to the other like a football as we rushed around the state when we both worked for the AG's office. It's one of the reasons Jane ultimately took the position of the Supreme Court, so she wouldn't travel as much. I mean, Jane's interviews would be a lot more interesting than mine because of her work representing prison officials in this state. She has better war stories than me. She's been to every major prison in this state. And for a female, honest to goodness, for a female to do that kind of work, walk into a prison, and we can all imagine what kind of comments are made and the fear, even though we know it's secure. But she has some great war stories on that. But yeah, it made it's probably why our child decided not to be a lawyer. She saw some of that.
How would you describe the rewards and advantages of a legal career?
You can do so much with a law degree other than practice law. You see lots of people doing, I mean, my job at Blue Cross, I was general counsel, but a lot of what I did had nothing to do with the law, but my law degree helped me do it. Understand the HR situation, the compliance situation,
Mediation, yeah.
problems. You see so many people who, realtors or government officials who use their law degree in non-legal settings. I give you the best example. I used to kid Vicki Gregg about it. Several of the Blue Cross Blue Shield CEOs were their general counsel. They advanced up. Here in town, great example is Bill Carpenter, who was the general counsel over at Life Point, and ultimately became the CEO of Life Point and made a ton of money as a result. But I can remember when I was appointed general counsel of Blue Cross, Bill was general counsel for Life Point, and I came up here and got some real help from him about what the job would entail. Because I mean, he was basically the general counsel for a big healthcare company.
Right.
I was going to be the general counsel for an insurance company, and so I came up here and spent some time with him, and he gave me some good pointers.
What would you say are the hardships and pitfalls of your career?
My career, I wish I'd had better guidance early on. I mean, we've talked about that. It's one of the reasons that I volunteered to be a mentor for the Nashville Bar. I want to give back what people gave me, like George Paine and John Ryder and Larry Lewis early on. But I did not have, I mean, my family, there were no lawyers in my family. So if I know more, it would have been helpful. So that was really tough. And, you know, yeah, the money was tight for a long time. I mean, our family didn't have a lot of money growing up, neither did James. So we, you know, times when you hoping those checks don't clear too quick. So it's kind of tough, but it's all worked out. As James would say, we've had a wonderful life. But I also would say, you know, that you never look back, you look forward, and we've got a long way to go forward. You and I have, by the way.
That's true. What do you say is the role of lawyers today and in the future? And you have been this, so what would you say it was?
You know, lawyers throughout our country's history have been on the front of making sure that we stay centered with the rule of law. If we don't have the rule of law, we lose all the other freedoms we've got. And hopefully, you know, lawyers are very involved in politics. You see that. The really discouraging part right now is we're politicizing our judiciary, politicizing the practice of law. Lawyers really need to understand both sides of an argument. You can have your side, but you need to understand the other side's argument, and you also need to understand that the other side's not the enemy. They're just your adversary. At the end of the day, y'all be able to walk away and have coffee and be friends. So hopefully, those who you know are educated in the law understand the principles underlying what it means to be a lawyer. I don't know if that's a good answer or not, Carol.
Well, I think it is very good. You had also indicated that lawyers play a very significant role in being a trusted advisor.
Yes.
And that is to be sure that people do follow the rule of law.
Right.
Doesn't necessarily mean you need to go to court, but you have to be a person of your word, and you have to be deserving of the trust that people place in you.
And you've got to be honest with people.
That's right. And as you said,
you've got to be able to deliver the bad
to Biggie
news.
Greg, you know.
Yeah, or Bob Corker or anyone else.
Right.
You've got to be able to deliver the bad news.
What do you do at present? What are your current activities?
Contemplating retirement. Seeing you and seeing my wife and having such fun in retirement, and you wonder what the heck am I doing?
But you're still involved in politics.
I'm still very involved in politics.
And that in and of
it's
itself.
hard today to
it
be
is
involved in politics. But if people like me and you are not involved, you know, then what happens? And I've always felt that as long as you're walking, you ought to try to make a difference. You know, whether you can or not, who knows? I feel like a lot of times I'm butting my head against a brick wall. I mean, heck, I'm just a little guy out there, and there's so much wrong right now in the world.
Are you still playing tennis?
I'm still playing tennis, yeah.
Are you still a mentor with the NBA?
Yes.
Have you ever been a mentor or worked with the National School of Law, like their writing program?
I was an adjunct professor over at Belmont.
Okay,
Belmont School of Law for about 3 or 4 years, and I'm actually on the Belmont Advisory Board for their law school currently.
and what did you, as an adjunct professor, what did you teach?
Conflict of laws,
Oh, good.
of all things. I knew very little about it when I started out, which was interesting, but I learned a lot
Yeah.
as we went along, and it was a an late afternoon class, which is always
Difficult to keep them awake.
difficult, and particularly on that subject matter.
What are some of your projects that you're yet to accomplish?
Well, I still think making a difference in a political.
Do you think you'll ever run for office?
I thought about it at times. I mean, that's difficult nowadays because of the,
Well, maybe Metro Council, something. Local.
yeah, I mean, when you say
Which-
off any of those, local or state.
Right.
If
Like
the
tax
opportunity-
assessor, you would be perfect having background in tax,
If I get rid of that R, I could.
but there's no R in any of these local elections.
Yeah, for tax
no-
assessor.
You know, everything at the
position.
local level, like Metro Council.
Well,
They-
Metro Council, you're right, Metro Council Mayor, always interested. Metro, through its charter, has its own membership in the legislative and executive branch, nonpartisan, but refuses to allow the elected state positions to be nonpartisan. I can't understand why politically, but,
And I think
Um,
you did mention to me, one of your to-do projects is the Australian Open.
yeah, Jane and I, one of these days would like to go see the
Me too.
tennis tournament in Australia. Yeah, maybe you and Jane, Roger and I, we can make a trip up. This is
Well,
what we're
it
gonna
would
do.
be like 3 or 4
Will
week
Roger
trip.
go? We can get some other people to go.
And
You think Margaret Bibb would be interested? No, it's not
no,
basketball.
she's basketball.
Yeah, it is basketball. Maybe we can tell her there's a women's basketball tournament over there.
I don't, maybe there will be by the time I go.
I need to ask Margaret grandmother off subject. I want to know what she thinks of the new women's basketball coach at UT.
I think that's a good question. for
I'd
her.
be interested if she
She's
thinks of
a
that.
UT grad.
Yeah.
Okay. What are the parameters of your type of retirement?
I don't know if I'm ever gonna really be able to retire. I like making a difference. I mean, and as Jane has told me, there are lots of ways to make a difference and retire, like getting more involved in church activities or in park center activities or local boards. I mean, that.
I didn't ask you about your church activities. Are you involved in them on a case-by-case basis, or do you have some long-term commitments? At
Yeah, well, I
church?
mean, we, both of us have served as the elders. I served as an elder, Jane served as an elder and a deacon in our churches, and first in Chattanooga. Well, she was a deacon here at First Pres.
Okay,
And we've both been elders over at Hillsborough Presbyterian.
where are you going now?
Hillsborough Presbyterian. We were married at Westminster here in town. We attended First Presbyterian here in town for many years when Beth was young. We remember Second Presbyterian in Chattanooga, downtown Presbyterian Church, which actually where Bob Cooper's family went. It was interesting. And now we moved to Hillsborough Presbyterian, which is a very small church. We are probably, you would appreciate this. We are probably 3 or 4 Republicans are in that church. It's a very Democrat church. In fact, Dan Elrod is a member of that church. And when he heard I was going there, he said, that doesn't sound like your type of church.
What did he
But
know?
church is not about politics.
No.
It's about making a difference in people's life.
That is so true. It has been a joy to be able to take your own history. We're going to notify them that they can turn us off now. I mean,
Okay,